A special note to moms. We're in a world of hurt these days, aren't we? Struggles lurk at every turn. Big struggles, complicated struggles. The world we grew up in is no more. Right is wrong, good is evil, up is down, left is right. And if we disagree with this new mindset, we're considered to be unenlightened, ignorant bigots. Good grief. My head spins just thinking about it. Our culture is hurtling out of control like a semi without brakes in the Rocky Mountains. This big, bustling ball of 21st century turmoil isn't the white picket fence fantasy life we imagined when we were still dressing up our Barbie dolls. But it's manageable until we bring a child into it. A child changes everything. 2 years ago, a friend of mine, retired Green Beret Scott Mann, asked me a simple yet life-altering question. If you could do anything with your story, Karen, what would it be? I had never pondered that thought. I had spent the previous 4 years in what seemed like a blur, spun up in a story that had a life of its own. A story that took this mother of 3 and grandmother of 6 across the nation, through the halls of Congress, into a National Press Club conference, and onto multiple national television sets and dozens of radio programs. A story that gave me the platform to not only become a contributing columnist for 2 major conservative media outlets, but also a national speaker and advisor for a veteran-driven advocacy organization. A story that ultimately placed me across the table from the war hero who asked me that thought-provoking question, one I now needed to answer. What would I do if I could do anything with my story? And the first person I thought of was you. You brave souls who brought a child into this crazy, spiraling out of control, upside-down world. You blessed women who understand the immeasurable joy and intense fear that come with parenting that precious bundle of joy, wondering if you've got what it takes to make your kid turn out right. So, what launched this life-altering story? In 2011, I lost my only son, U.S. Navy SEAL Aaron Carson Vaughn, to the war on terror. He gave his life fighting to protect and defend our nation, our way of life. In addition to his father and me, plus his 2 sisters, he left behind a wife and 2 small children. I've been told that moms won't want to read a story about a woman who lost her son. None of us want to contemplate what that reality would look like. It's too raw, too painful. But this isn't a book about loss. This is a book about life. A life so well lived that it left a legacy, a presence that took on a life of its own. When history is written, don't we all want the same to be said of our children? The book you're about to read had already been written before I ever understood its God-given purpose. Not long after Aaron's death, I started jotting down everything I could remember about our life with Aaron. I wanted his children to know him. I wanted them to be able to laugh along with the stories that they should have heard him tell. I wanted them to have a record, if you will, of who he was and how large he lived. Something tangible that they could pick up any time they needed to feel close to their dad and read or reread 1,000 times. I especially wanted them to see Aaron through my eyes so they could understand the magnitude of this man who, cradle to grave, elevated everyone he knew to a higher form of living. When I looked back through the pages of what I wrote in those days following Aaron's death, I realized those very stories I had collected contained a thread, an intricate image of the making of a man who became a world changer. With that realization came the understanding that I wanted to share my story with you. I had already spoken to a few moms groups and recognized that what I had experienced was valuable. I certainly do not claim the title of perfect mom, but I have learned a lot and firmly believe that one of the best ways we, as mothers, learn from each other is by simply communicating with each other. Your children's lives are packed with teachable moments. Aaron's was no different. While this book is based on the forging of a young man who ultimately became one of America's most elite warriors, I encourage you to look between the lines for your story, your family. Search out the truths that apply to your world. I urge you to immerse yourself in not only the triumphs, but also the pains, because life's greatest lessons are often filtered through the lens of deep personal loss. Raising great kids, kids with purpose, legacy-leaving kids is completely possible. However, greatness never emerges from complacency. It's hard work. We moms are among those blessed enough and trusted enough by God to shape the future. Our children are the future. Don't ever forget that. You are raising the future. Be diligent. I've been asked many times how we raised a man with such an indomitable spirit, how we brought up a boy so courageous that he willingly gave his life for a cause greater than himself. I decided to think those questions through and transfer my genuine thoughts to the page. In the back of this book, you'll find a study guide that will help you evaluate this story in a different light. I pray you'll find it helpful. Part 1, The Forging. Chapter 1, A Rocky Start. It was 1980, the year John Lennon died and Reagan defeated Carter, the year of button-down shirts and blazers, Rubik's Cubes and cordless phones, the year the Raiders, Lakers, and Phillies dominated the sports world, and the year I fell in love with Billy Carson Vaughn. We grew up in small, adjoining towns in northwest Tennessee. We didn't have malls, theaters, or even fast food joints to hang out in, so we had to be a little more creative. Weekend nights were spent cruising along the main street of my town, Union City, windows down, radios blaring. Along its curves were the strategic pit stops we would drive through slowly in hopes of running up on something, or more to the point, someone interesting. IGA Grocery was one of those stops. I was parked there on a Friday night that May when Billy and I noticed each other across the lot. Instead of walking over to me himself, he sent a friend to my car to see if I would like to talk to him. His audacity made me smile. Within weeks, we became inseparable. So much so that when the time came for me to head off to college in the fall, I switched schools, choosing a campus less than half an hour away from our hometown. Then, during my very first semester, I noticed some changes in my body. It wasn't long until I began suspecting I might be pregnant. I remember the pain in my parents' faces as if it were yesterday. They were sad, and rightfully so. All their aspirations and plans for what I could have become, what I might have accomplished, began fading as that tiny pink line emerged on my drugstore pregnancy test. Those hopes disappeared completely when my mother, the first ultrasonographer in our little corner of the world, confirmed the pregnancy with a sonogram. There it was, in black and white, a tiny beating heart. My parents were liberal enough in their thinking to not force Billy and me into a shotgun wedding, but conservative enough to have taught me that abortion would never be an option. And it wasn't. The only decision I had to make was, would I be a single mom or would I marry my child's father? In all honesty, there was no question. We would marry. We would honor God, even though we had made a mess of things. And just like that, my destiny was sealed. Instead of spending those college-age years living large and answering to no one but myself, I became a wife. I became a mother. And as every young mother worth her weight finds out immediately, I was no longer the center of my universe. Tan lines gave way to stretch marks. My once flat stomach morphed into a hilarious bulging ball of baby. And somehow, I felt more alive, more beautiful, and more at peace than ever before. Then finally, on June 24th, 1981, a 9-pound, 11-ounce, blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby boy made his entrance into this world, Aaron Carson Vaughn. And just like that, a girl became a woman. Seconds before, a mother's child, now a child's mother. As I held that beautiful baby to my chest, touched the tip of my nose to his, counted all 10 fingers and all 10 toes, I experienced a sensation foreign to anything I had ever known. It was still. It was perfect. It was unconditional love. I saw the same in Billy's eyes. I watched in wonder as he tenderly brought Aaron's face to his shoulder, his strong hands cupping Aaron's neck, head, and bottom. The way he laid his cheek against Aaron's tiny face amazed me. Look at you two. Just look at you, honey. You're a daddy. A profound bond had clearly been conceived, and nothing in Billy's life would ever be the same again. As we stood over his crib that very first night after bringing him home from the hospital, we held each other tight in awestruck wonder. "Can you believe we're parents, Billy?" "Not really," he said. "I still can't believe the hospital just let us take him home. We don't know anything." Billy was 24, and I was only 19. We felt completely ill-equipped for the journey ahead, but we held on to each other and just kept walking. I remember so many times in those first years when we would watch Aaron sleep and marvel at the thought that this amazing little man, handcrafted by God, was ours. We felt so blessed to be entrusted with such an unspeakably precious gift. At the time, our country was in a state of unrest. We had witnessed a recent assassination attempt on our sitting president, and tensions between America and the Soviet Union were at their peak. Yet somehow, in our little corner of the world, we felt safe. We felt sheltered. A family had been formed. Since Aaron was not only our first child, but also the first grandchild on both sides of the family, you can imagine how full steam ahead the spoiling train ran. If that boy so much as grunted, someone had him in his or her arms immediately, and the circus would begin. Every adult in the room would then fully engage in the discovery and quick relief of his discontent. Somehow still, he was an exceptionally good baby, always happy, always smiling. I never took that for granted and was quick to thank God whenever it crossed my mind. As a young mother, I especially treasured the fact that Aaron was a good sleeper and slept a lot. Years later, we would discover that he had suffered from allergies throughout his infant and toddler years, and the allergies kept him somewhat lethargic and less motivated than most boys his age. As a result, he spent a lot of time cuddling on our laps, learning that affection was healthy and that his parents represented love and safety. I believe God used those very issues with Aaron's health as a way of forming him into the man he would one day be. During those years, he became secure in kindness, gentleness, tenderness, and respect. As he grew older, he never once allowed others to make him think those attributes were uncool. Instead, he made them cool. He had a way of rubbing off on a person like that. Chapter 2. The Battle of Becoming. From the time Aaron could talk enough to genuinely express himself, it was clear that something was very different about him. He had a unique sense of discernment and a kind of nobility that seemed odd for such a young child. Billy and I worked hard to recognize, encourage, and reinforce those positive qualities in our son. Forging Aaron's heart into what would ultimately become the heart of a warrior was no simple task, but his father, Billy, is no simple man. He took the challenge of shaping his son's character seriously. Billy is cut from that rare cloth of true American patriots, a tough guy with a huge heart. He embodies courage and strength, but beneath that lays an artful blend of humility, a deep love for God, and a moral compass which never allows him to leave course. In other words, he had been born to be Karen Vaughn's father. And without a doubt, God clearly designated our small farm in rural northwest Tennessee as a training ground on which Billy's purpose would be accomplished. I grew up as somewhat of a city girl, so I cringed whenever Billy called Aaron outside to help Daddy with farm activities that I believed to be way beyond Aaron's level of maturity or physical capacity. My mother's heart was always at work attempting to protect my baby from the dangers lurking in every crevice of that farm. Billy's heart was driven to look for opportunities to teach Aaron how to be strong, fearless, gritty, and confident. I remember walking out to the woods one day after the two of them had been working for many hours. In the distance, I could see Aaron, around 8 years old, astride a four-wheel all-terrain vehicle, revving the engine. Only when I moved in for closer inspection did I notice the rope stretched between the rack of the revving four-wheeler and the 30-foot tree Billy was cutting down with the chainsaw. I heard Billy scream, "Put it in gear and pull, son!" My screeches of disbelief seemed to fall on deaf ears, but sheepish grins on both of their faces gave them away. They knew I had seen them. While I didn't find that situation laughable, I tried hard to understand it from Billy's perspective. During the early years of our marriage, we had our share of confrontations over how to raise our children. Looking back, though, I'm glad my fears didn't stop Billy. Aaron was learning to overcome larger-than-life obstacles. With or without my nod of confidence in his father's judgment, he was being treated like a man rather than a boy. The forging had begun. It makes me smile to think about how fiercely I fought the forging. I actually battled it in every way I knew how, from dressing Aaron head to toe in solid white outfits to entering him in the Troy Tiny Tot Beauty Review, which, by the way, he won, but never forgave me for. A dash of pride, mixed with a little shame, blushes my cheeks when I think about that less than honorable moment in parenting. But the pictures were worth all the grief I took. They offered me a ton of leverage through the teenage years. Nearly all cattle farmers can attest to having a cow or bull in their herd that quickly earns a reputation as a troublemaker. On the Vaughn farm, that cow was named White Cow. She earned her complex and well-thought-out moniker from Aaron and his younger sister Tara, who were terrified to even make eye contact with her, much less stand in her presence. In order to understand the dynamics at work, you need to know that we raised White Cow from the time she was a tiny calf. She had grown up on our farm. She was the boss, a living, breathing, bovine dictator. For some reason, she decided early on that this farm belonged to her. Therefore, anyone who stepped foot on her farm without her expressed approval deserved to suffer her wrath. With huge horns and ridiculously long floppy ears, this Brahman cow would paw the dirt, snort and shake her head, then charge the fence if we had the audacity to walk out of our back door. Her snorts and snarls allowed her to maintain perfect control over the Vaughn siblings' comings and goings on her 47-acre dynasty. The entertaining stories of White Cow's attitude and antics have circled our table for years. Our favorite one revolves around the life lesson Billy insisted on teaching Aaron sometime around his 10th birthday. We were corralling the cattle that day, and Aaron's job was to stand by the open gap and then quickly shut the gate when the last cow entered the pens. Billy coached Aaron, "Stand your ground, son. If White Cow charges you, just punch her in the face." I watched with trepidation as the herd moved toward the pens, trying my hardest to stay out of this and to keep my mouth shut. Aaron, doing his dead-level best to trust his father, began swaying from side to side, nervously shaking out his tiny hands and then tightening his fists until his knuckles lost all color. We all knew that White Cow saw Aaron as a challenge, one she believed she could win, since he couldn't have weighed more than 80 pounds soaking wet. Finally, White Cow made her predictable move. Pawing the dirt, her head dropped, and she charged my baby. To my utter astonishment, Aaron stood his ground, jerked his tiny little arm back in nerve-wracking defiance, and punched that heifer square in the nose. Stunned and seemingly humiliated, White Cow staggered backward, dropped her head, and with her first ever act of compliance, entered the pen behind the other cows. But not before she gave one final horn-shaking threat to let Aaron know she may be down, but she wasn't out. I think Aaron was as stunned as his bovine nemesis, but he had done it. He had defeated White Cow. This enormous victory was a juncture in time which deserved slow-motion replays and possibly even fireworks as a fitting commemoration. Although the cameras weren't there to capture that glorious triumph, the moment was properly celebrated later when Aaron rode with his dad to the market one day and White Cow became a pot roast. From then on, a huge grin of conquest plastered Aaron's face at the mention of her name. That story is just one glimpse of many similar stories about life on our farm. Aaron was becoming, with or without my help, that strong, fearless, confident son his father had envisioned since he first lifted him to his chest and gazed into those huge, hope-filled eyes. When Aaron was about 8 years old, he started telling anyone who would listen, "One day I'm going to be a Navy SEAL." God had used Billy, and the time he and Aaron spent together taking care of the cattle on our farm, to plant that dream. One afternoon, while Billy and Aaron were out on the farm patching fences, they had the truck radio on, keeping them company. Someone on air mentioned the Army Rangers, and Aaron asked his dad about the Rangers and what they did. Billy answered with a statement that ultimately shifted the course of our family's history. "Son, the Rangers are really tough. But there's a group of men out there who are a little tougher. because they work on the land, in the air, and in the water. They're called Navy SEALs. Something in his father's words stirred Aaron's 8-year-old mind, and just like that, his future was determined. Over the years, I had to continuously remember to let Aaron be a boy and to allow him to pursue his huge, crazy dreams. I watched in fear, biting my lip, while his daddy turned him loose on three-wheelers and unsaddled colts, and later with fireworks, BB guns, and then rifles. By the time Aaron was 10, he was driving a truck around the farm to help with all the daily chores. Billy worked very hard to grow Aaron into a young man, while I wanted so desperately to protect him, to do everything in my power to build a wall around him that could never be penetrated by danger. The thought that the fragile little lives of my beautiful children were in my hands completely overwhelmed me. At times, the thought would literally keep me awake at night. This stress was intensified when it came to Aaron because he had such a perfect innocence about him, an innocence which demanded protection. I still chuckle thinking back on the morning his little sister, Tara, 2 years his junior, told him the truth about the tooth fairy. In total incredulity, he bolted to my side and grabbed my leg, screaming, "You're lying, Tara, shut up. Tell her to shut up, Mom." Tara, finding his reaction hilarious, screamed back, "There's no Santa Claus either, Aaron," and the dam broke. While his heart was fierce and fearless, it was equally innocent and tender. That pure, unadulterated tenderness was a gift, one that surged through his veins until the day he left this earth. In the midst of those fear-ridden years, while toiling to fortify that bulwark around my babies, God brought Sarah Williams into my life. She became a very dear friend who, as it turned out, taught me one of the most valuable lessons I ever needed to learn. While patiently listening to me vent my fears during a heart-to-heart conversation one day, Sarah finally interrupted me, looked me straight in the eye, and with great tenderness began explaining to me that my children were not my possessions. They belonged to God. They were on loan to me. Yes, they had been entrusted to me to care for, love, teach, and protect, but ultimately their lives were in God's hands, not mine. With gentle, carefully chosen words, Sarah taught me that God knew them before they ever were. He loved them more than I ever could, and He alone was responsible for the number of breaths they would draw on this side of eternity. I will never forget the simplicity of her confidence when she said, "Only God is with them everywhere they go, every minute of every day. You, my friend, are not." Her words prompted me to contemplate how futile it was to think I had the power to keep them alive. What a ridiculous, arrogant concept to give myself so much credit for another's well-being. In the long run, that life lesson gave me the strength to allow the forging to continue. And so it did. Chapter 3, Childhood Joys. Nestled comfortably on our small farm in northwest Tennessee, our children grew up surrounded by an extraordinarily loving family, a tight-knit community, and many close friends. Their lifestyle was truly something to be envied, and the memories of those years run deep. Billy was always content with earning the family's living and allowing me the privilege of being a stay-at-home mom. At times I took jobs of my own to bolster our income, but those stints never lasted long. I would find myself overwhelmed with guilt, feeling like I was somehow failing in my real job, my real calling, which was, in my mind, raising my children. I wanted to take my kids to school each morning. I wanted them to know that I would be in car line picking them up each afternoon. I also wanted them to know that if they needed me at any time during the day, all they had to do was call. We sacrificed a lot to give our kids that kind of stability, but felt content in doing so. Being a stay-at-home mom also lent itself to a great deal of fun, especially when the kids were out of school. On a typical summer day, I met up with 2 or 3 of my friends and their kids at one of the neighborhood pools. All of us moms would busy ourselves with sunbathing and catching up on our latest magazines and gossip while our kids splashed about enjoying a refreshing break in the hot, humid Tennessee summer. But before long, the kids would no longer be content with letting us moms just rest. I'm sure you can relate. "Call it out, Mom," I'd hear him scream. "Yeah, call it out, Miss Karen." I knew what they meant. The kids would line up on the scorching concrete with the only relief coming from the water cooling the ground as it dripped off their soaking wet bodies. One at a time, they would step onto the diving board and run towards the end. As their feet planted for that final push-off from that floppy rough surface, I would call out the challenge. "Cannonball, swan dive, can opener." As soon as they came up for air, they would sling their wet faces straight toward us moms and wait for their score. "Whoa, that was most definitely a 10, someone else would say. "I don't know, I'd call it an 8.5, and the kids would scream back, "Oh, come on." At some point, the heat would become too much for all of us moms. We would put our magazines down and let the kids take their turn making the calls and divvying out the points. And they never took it easy on us. Those days were full of love and laughter and are among some of my sweetest memories. Usually the fun spilled over to the local ballpark where, as the sun set, we would all come together again while the kids played ball with or against each other. In our world, everyone brought their own lawn chairs and coolers, but the unspoken rule was, this is community, and what's mine is yours. Most of us were not people of means, but that actually fostered our sense of community, because we all understood need and were quick to meet on each other's behalf any that arose among us. We cheered for each other's children and enjoyed their victories like they were our own. If someone took a head dive into home plate, 10 moms or dads rushed the field. We were invested in each other, and our kids knew it. We were family. Aaron clearly embraced the simplicity of our lifestyle, and it was evident that he was secure in the deep love Billy and I had for him, with or without luxuries. He always described himself as lucky, a term that melted my heart. As my children grew into adults, they would often talk about those financially lean years as the best of their lives. They explored every ridge of our farm, every tree they could climb, every vine that would hold their weight, or not, and every inch of crystal clear creek bed. Aaron and his sister, as well as their cousins and friends, knew the meaning of good, clean fun, the kind where, if you're not completely filthy at the end of the day, something didn't go right. They explored every ridge of our farm, every tree they could climb, every vine that would hold their weight, or not, and every inch of crystal clear creek bed. It all became a part of who they were. The dirt on that land embedded in their very core. It not only stained their clothes, but it also stained their souls. So much so that Aaron took the farm with him whenever he could. Sharon Regan, Aaron's third-grade teacher at Hillcrest Elementary School, sent this tender letter to me on August 6, 2014, 3 years after Aaron's death. It read, "I never knew what Aaron was going to bring to class. First, it was a frog in a dress shirt box. The poor thing was making so much noise, I decided to let the little thing out. A bullfrog the size of a baseball leaped out and into my jumper pocket as I screamed and made a fool of myself, but to Aaron's delight. I had to check his backpack daily because I never knew what was going to be in it. One day he asked me if he could bring his pig to school to show everyone. I thought he just had a normal pig, so I said no, because we could see pigs from the playground. Aaron, with those big eyes, looked at me and said, 'But my pig is special because he can do tricks and he lives in our house.' I had no idea what a pot-bellied pig was, so I was expecting this big old pig the next day. I could hear it squealing as it came down the hall, begging for Frosted Flakes. All Aaron said was, 'I told you he was special.' Aaron was a special one, and I will never forget him or those special times with him." On another occasion, I was dropping Aaron off at school after a dental appointment, and while signing him in at the front office, Mrs. Regan walked by. She said, "Aaron, honey, why is your backpack dripping?" When I heard her question, I looked down and noticed a trail of water leading all the way out the front door to our car. When I checked Aaron's backpack, I discovered an ice cream bucket full of tadpoles. "I'm sorry, Mama. I had to leave the lid off so they could breathe." And I said, "But why on earth did you bring them to school, honey?" And Aaron said back, "Because I knew you'd throw them out if I left them in my room." I had a hard time getting mad about that excuse because he was probably correct. And he was so dang adorable. It was always something with Aaron, but Aaron's somethings were always comical. One of our favorite stories revolves around the time Aaron accidentally shot his cousin. Billy had bought Aaron his very first Red Ryder BB gun, a pump-action gun, and Billy had given careful instruction to never pump the gun more than twice. Well, one day, while playing at the barn, Aaron decided to pump the gun 6 times instead. Then he promptly tripped, fired the gun, and shot his cousin Courtney in the back as she was climbing a gate. In quick reaction to her writhing pain, Aaron bolted for the house. By the time Courtney and her huge red welt arrived, Aaron's case for innocence was in full deliberation. "I didn't mean to, Mom." "Didn't mean to what, son? Shoot Courtney. It was an accident, I swear. I don't even know how the gun went off." On many occasions, Billy and I had a terrible time keeping straight faces while hearing Aaron's descriptions of accidents and other negative incidents. With total sincerity, he would say things like, "Tara's face just ran into my hand. I don't know how it happened." Or, "She was running by and my foot just jerked and tripped her." Body parts or inanimate objects were almost always liable. He was creative, to say the least. But don't get me wrong. Billy and I didn't simply laugh these things off. We chuckled privately at Aaron's weak attempts to circumvent what he knew was coming. We did not laugh at what he had done. We took our parenting seriously. We were keenly aware that discipline was necessary and that Aaron needed to understand that actions create consequences. We made a concerted effort to be creative and effective with our forms of discipline, and we were never shy about using them. Of course, in the shooting incident, the gun was taken away for quite some time. As hard as it was to seize the gun when he had just received it, we felt that this was the right thing to do. Until he could treat the gun with the level of respect it deserved, it would remain in our closet. On more than one occasion, Aaron and Tara's childhood antics nearly cost me my sanity. One day, as I was just about to jump in our downstairs shower, I realized they were both outside on the four-wheeler. Deciding I wanted them to park the four-wheeler until I was done showering, I grabbed a towel, threw it around me, and ran outside, barefoot. As soon as I opened the back door, I could hear a faint, weak voice in the distance yelling, "Help, Mom, help!" Terrified, I took off running. I crested the second ridge from our house before I saw them both lying in the field, the four-wheeler flipped on its top. Rushing to them, screaming for a response, I saw Aaron motionless and Tara crying. My heart nearly stopped. Long story short, they were both fine. Aaron was pretending to be knocked out cold for fear of what I would do when I found out he'd been letting his little sister drive. I guess he thought his chances to evade punishment would be greater if I thought he was unconscious. Only after my wheezing sigh of relief did I realize that I was standing in the middle of my farm with no shoes and no clothes. We made a million memories on that farm, and it seemed like there was never a dull day or night. In celebration of Aaron's 10th birthday, he and his friends decided they wanted to camp out in our woods. Aaron had no idea just how dark those woods would become after the sun set and Daddy went into the house. We spent the whole day prepping the area, shopping for the perfect junk food, pitching the tent, and getting everything just right. 20 minutes after being out there, Aaron came inside and asked, "Hey, Mom, would it be all right if we moved out of the woods and pitched the tent right behind the barn?" "Well, sure, son. What's wrong?" I was secretly smiling. "Oh, nothing. It's just a long walk to the house from back there." About an hour later, Billy woke me up after he did a quick check on the boys. Laughing under his breath, he said, "You've got to come see this." The boys had moved their tent all the way up to the gate that separated our yard from the farm. We had a good laugh and went back to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night and decided to just take a quick glance to make sure everything was still okay. This time, they were in the backyard, directly outside the back door. I could barely contain my laughter. Billy and I teased Aaron mercilessly the next day, but he defended his actions with wide eyes and an anxious tone. "Dad, seriously, there was something trying to get in our tent last night. And every time we moved, it followed us. It was snorting and pushing on the edges right at the ground, like it was trying to lift up the tent." Billy cracked up. "Son, that was probably Simon, our pot-bellied pig. He roots at everything, especially when he smells food." Never a dull moment. We had bonfires in the fall, went sledding down the large rolling hills in the winter, and four-wheeled through the hay-covered fields, poplar-canopied woods, and crystal-clear creek beds year-round. All that our kids needed could be found on that tiny parcel of land God gave us as their stomping ground, their base. They were happy children. And me? I tried as best I could to allow my kids the opportunity to be just that, kids. I knew adventure and risk were both necessary for the development of courage, strength, and independence. I also knew failure had its place. How can anyone truly appreciate victory without having had a good dose of defeat? I was learning to let go, and they were learning to thrive. Chapter 4: Realities of Life. As the endless rotation of time continues, most of us experience hitches that throw us off course, at least momentarily. The Vaughn family snags came wrapped in both great blessing and great pain. By the time Aaron hit his preteens, he and his little sister witnessed firsthand the devastating indifference and depravity of mankind. Their first encounter with pain revolved around an adoption attempt on our family's part, which instead of ending in a happy adoption, ended in an abrupt, unexpected, heartbreaking abortion. This was a crucial point in Aaron and Tara's spiritual development. They were deeply and personally aggrieved by the choice this young mother made to terminate the life of their would-be little brother or sister. My kids had already made plans and picked out names. The mother's decision was a cruel interruption of their hopes and expectations for what could have been, what should have been. Their tender little eyes filled with anguish as I explained what had happened. I said, "I'm so sorry. I tried to stop her. I begged her not to go through with the abortion, but I couldn't change her mind." Tara spoke first. "Why would she do that?" I just said, "I don't know, sweetie. I can't explain it." Aaron's words cut straight to the heart of it. She just killed him? It was hard to defend because there was no defense. I just wrapped my arms around them both, and we cried. Although Aaron and Tara had formed a personal relationship with Christ by then, I believe they began viewing humanity in a somewhat different light after that day. The lesson we tried to teach them was simple. People are not perfect, but God is. He is the only one who will never fail or forsake us. And yes, sometimes He allows terrible things, but He alone knows why, and He can be trusted. Then came the blessing. After years of prayer, unable to have any more children on our own, God laid Anna Marie Vaughn in our arms through a private adoption. We brought her home when she was only 7 months old. Those first few weeks after Anna's arrival were magical. Aaron was almost 12 and Tara was 10. Because of their ages, they acted more like parents than siblings. They couldn't get enough of this new wonder now crawling the floors of our home, giggling and cooing her way into our hearts. The two of them often fought over who got to rock her to sleep at night. Watching them embrace our perfect little addition with zero resentment or hesitation was a precious sight. Anna completed our family, and life was wonderful. But this euphoria would prove to be short-lived. Unbeknownst to us, unspeakable darkness lay just beyond view. Within months of our family's highest high, we experienced the darkest year we had known to date. There are moments in time when a transformation takes place, and nothing is ever the same again. In the scientific world, these pivotal junctures are known as paradigm shifts. And boy, were we about to experience one. Our shift came in the form of a church split. Unwittingly, we became targets by association to the most brutal onslaught of condemnation I had ever witnessed in or out of the church. Somehow, the decision was made that certain families in our small-town, close-knit body posed a threat to the changes a new pastor sought to implement. And, quite literally, all hell broke loose. Only Satan himself could have orchestrated the ensuing scenario. I'm not sure that anyone involved truly understood what was happening or why. Insults begat deeper, more personal insults, and as integrities were questioned, accusations flew. Lifelong relationships, as well as the people behind them, were demolished. These gut-wrenching displays of human weakness must incomprehensibly grieve the heart of God. so I will not expound further. Those who have endured a church split may grasp the magnitude of what we lived. I struggled greatly over whether to discuss this portion of our life at all, but its value in building Aaron's character could not be denied. Through this disruption, we lost nearly every friend with whom we had previously shared the most intimate parts of our lives. We had no more days at the pool. The once thriving with life ballpark became a place of finger-pointing, torment, and excruciating isolation for us as well as all the children caught in the crossfire. Our kids and others were mocked in their school classrooms by students and, believe it or not, even one of their teachers. And tragically, Aaron and Tara were repudiated by their once loving church youth ministries, of which they had been a fundamental part. Anna was still an infant, so thankfully she was unaffected. It was as if the lights had gone out. Our storybook life had ended. As Billy and I pondered these things in our hearts, we often referred to this monumental overturn as something akin to losing your entire family in a moment's flash. In the wake of this unprecedented cruelty at the hands of people our family had once trusted, Aaron and Tara had a decision to make, a profound one, an essential one. They needed to determine right then and there whether their trust rested in the church and its people or in God and God alone. Their entire identities and everything they believed hung in the balance. Rather than becoming bitter, as could have been expected, the two of them became grounded, determined, and serious about the concept of righteousness. I'm not saying they didn't struggle. They did. They were forced to build new friendships, find new activities to engage in, and redefine the life they had previously lived. Recovering from this whole situation was an unimaginably painful process, which took years of healing to completely overcome. But it had its place in their development, and ultimately did the work God intended it to do. Remember the affliction I lived with? My desperate desire to protect my children? There was no need to fret. Looking back, I can see that God, in His sovereignty, wanted Tara, and especially Aaron, to experience every drop of our church split. He wanted Aaron to understand, fully recognize, and despise injustice. God wanted to teach Aaron about the glorious reward of standing for right, even when, or especially when, all others run in fear. But mostly, I believe He wanted to teach Aaron the principle of the lukewarm, that those who are neither hot nor cold are of all men most desolate. Revelation 3:15-17. Billy wasn't the only one forging our son's heart. Our great God was most definitely at work. He saturated my dry, fragile spirit with this promise: what Satan meant for evil, I meant for good. Our warrior's heart was being consecrated. Chapter 5. The world around him. Aaron was a boy who loved fun and games, yet he also had a serious, tender side to his personality. He possessed an extraordinary capacity for love and respect, and bore an innate burden for the downtrodden. One of the most amazing acts of kindness I have ever witnessed came through Aaron's hands. We were on our way home from Nashville's Youth Evangelism Conference with a busload of teenagers when we stopped at a fast food restaurant for a very late meal. The kitchen staff planned to close the restaurant as soon as our last teenager was served. As usual, Aaron waited in the back of the line. If someone were going to miss out on being served, it would be Aaron. He would make sure of it. Aaron and I talked as we waited and waited and waited for our turn. At one point, I heard a few awkward chuckles coming from the dining area, where some of the teens were seated. I glanced around and noticed an elderly, poorly dressed, and very disheveled-looking man walking around inside the restaurant. He appeared to be slightly disoriented, too. I was a little bothered by our teens' somewhat rude reactions, but with my stomach growling and my full focus on satisfying that hunger, I didn't give the situation much attention. After a while, Aaron and I ordered our food, and as expected, the kitchen closed the minute we received it. With my meal in hand, I headed straight to an open table to devour my sandwich. As I sat down, I noticed Aaron hadn't followed, so I started searching the restaurant to see where he had gone. "Are you looking for Aaron, Miss Karen?" one of the teens asked, and then pointed to the front of the restaurant just beyond the glass. "He's out there." Aaron was outside with that same homeless man who was now sitting on the front sidewalk. I hadn't even paid attention to where the man had gone. I had ignored him. But it was not in Aaron's DNA to do the same. My heart was moved with a strong blend of guilt and pride as I watched Aaron hand the man his food. All of it. But Aaron wasn't finished. He not only fed the man physically, but he also spent the next 15 minutes sharing the love of Christ with the battered old broken man that the rest of us had ignored and rejected. I watched from behind as Aaron's arms flowed through gestures I recognized well, the old gentleman staring into Aaron's eyes and nodding with understanding. Aaron pointed to the sky, then touched his heart. When his strong hands formed the shape of a bridge, I knew exactly where he was in the story. I was never more proud of anyone in my entire life. Unbeknownst to Aaron, the whole restaurant watched in silence. When he finally came back inside, I offered to share my food. He refused. He wanted to experience the sacrifice. He wanted to give without receiving anything in return. This was Aaron Vaughn at his finest. He was the boy any mother would be proud to call son. I couldn't tell you how many times Billy and I were applauded for how respectful, compassionate, and well-mannered Aaron was. He was a young man who honored those in authority over him and had no problem submitting and even humbling himself to those authority figures. With that humility came a heart filled with genuine kindness. He was happy to place others before himself, and in fact, he found great reward in doing so. Looking back now, I believe a lot of Aaron's character traits and his personality that made him seem almost larger than life at times took root in what Billy and I chose to emphasize with our kids. We taught Aaron, as well as Tara and Anna, to say ma'am and sir. We didn't teach this because we wanted people to feel old, but because we wanted them to feel respected. And as we demanded our children use those terms when addressing adults, the sense that adults were to be respected grew organically. With that constant training in Aaron's early years, respect and compassion for his father and I, as well as other adults, had become second nature by the time he moved into his teens. As I said earlier, Aaron's healing from our church split took some time. He suffered through some serious struggles over that life-altering event. But God was not about to let that boy, or the rest of us, lose hope. God sent us a miracle. His name was Reverend Jimmy Brown. Sometimes the only one who can really minister to a wounded soul is someone whose soul itself has been wounded. When Jimmy first visited our family to invite us to his church, I found him to be a kind yet stoic man. Though I couldn't put my finger on it, I knew something was very different about him. I was captivated by the unyielding capacity he possessed to befriend, love, and care for the broken, for us. In the subsequent days, weeks, and months, the body of believers at Pleasant Hill Baptist Church drew us under their wings. They bandaged our wounds and set us on our feet again. In a million years, I could never repay the people of that tiny country church for what they gave my family. A place of hope, a place of refuge, and a place of healing. Aaron became close friends with the Browns' youngest son, Josh, and subsequently ended up becoming close to Brother Jimmy and his wife, Judy. Aaron spent a lot of time at their home being cared for and loved. They treated him like family. These precious people and their capacity for love restored Aaron's and Tara's trust in church leadership. After getting to know the Browns, we learned where all their grace and tenderness came from, a place of personal grief which we had no way of comprehending at the time. The year before we met them, their teenage son, Doug, had tragically lost his life. I cannot fathom how they mustered the strength to care about and love on us while they themselves were in so much pain. But I am eternally grateful for their love and compassion. Not long after our arrival at Pleasant Hill, we took a mission trip to West Virginia. On our team were many teenagers, as well as a few senior adults. As the week moved along, one of those seniors became quite agitated with the teenagers' antics and sense of humor, and this man freely expressed his agitation. One day, while Mr. Prince was napping in a wingback chair, Aaron decided to have a little fun. He inked in Gorbachev's birthmark on the old man's bald head. Mr. Prince then spent the rest of the day and night sporting the faux mark, murmuring and grunting, "What's wrong with you people? What's so funny?" Hours passed before anyone gave it away. Once the cat was out of the bag, Mr. Prince got a good laugh out of it, as did the rest of us. That was our Aaron, always looking for a way to enjoy the moment and make others laugh. He definitely knew how to squeeze memorable fun out of any situation, and he was a total clown. Finding a picture of him during those years without a smile plastered across his face is nearly impossible. Laughter and good-hearted mischief defined his disposition. Remember my description of Aaron's utter innocence, which followed him throughout his life? Here's a perfect illustration. Billy's sister Kelly and her family bought a portion of our farm not many years after we settled there. Their home was nestled at the edge of the woods near the southeastern corner of our farm. As Aaron grew, he saw their property as a training ground for developing his stealth Navy SEAL skills. He would slither out of the woods, belly crawl to their family room or kitchen window, and see how long it would take for someone to discover his presence. I can still picture the perplexed look on his face the day I explained to him, "Son, you could crawl up there one day and see something you may not want to see." As understanding finally flooded his eyes, I could tell that the thought had never crossed his mind. From then on, he made sure the whole family was home before he played any recon games at their windows. And boy, did his recon games give us some good laughs over the years. One late afternoon, when Aaron was about 14, he came bursting through our back door and into the kitchen just as I was putting dinner in the oven. He could barely speak as he doubled over, one hand on his belly and one on his knee, laughing hysterically. I cracked up just watching him. After a few seconds, he gained his composure, enough to tell me what had happened. Through waves of laughter, he explained that he had crept up to Kelly's dining room window during their mealtime. He said, "Mom, the window was cracked open just a little, and Trey was sitting there with his back against it, so I got down right beneath the window, and I burped real loud." Now, by this time, tears were rolling out of the corners of Aaron's eyes. As he continued trying to catch his breath through his wheezing laughter, he continued, "Aunt Kelly thought it was Trey and got all over him, so I did it again. I just kept doing it over and over again, and Trey kept flipping around trying to see who it was, and Aunt Kelly just got madder and madder because Trey wouldn't admit it was him doing it. Trey kept saying, 'It's not me, Mama. I swear it's not me.' And that just made her even more upset. I finally couldn't take it anymore and started laughing out loud. You should have seen it. Oh my gosh." I could barely contain myself laughing just watching him try to tell the story. On another occasion, he returned to our home laughing just as wildly as he told me how he had just slithered to the edge of their property to do surveillance on Uncle Larry, Kelly's husband, while he worked in the yard. With face painted and body covered with camouflage and leaves, Aaron laid in wait to once again see how long he could remain unnoticed. About 15 minutes in, Larry walked to the edge of the woods. Thinking he'd been discovered, Aaron was just about to stand when Larry began unzipping his pants to relieve himself. Aaron's laughter jolted Larry to a halt when he screamed out, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, Uncle Larry." Even with his crazy antics and pranks, Aaron still enjoyed nothing more than sitting at his father's feet for a good history lesson. His eyes would come to life as he and his dad discussed issues of the day and compared current policies to the intentions of our founders. Aaron's patriotism was remarkable, but it was taught. Make no mistake about it. Our children were constantly made aware and reminded of the great prices paid by those who came before us, those who ensured our freedom. They knew to place their hand over their hearts and stand at attention when the national anthem was sung or the Pledge of Allegiance spoken. By his early teens, Aaron had clearly developed a keen awareness of world events and a strong desire to understand which world leaders were moving the chess pieces. While most kids his age couldn't tell you who the current president was, Aaron could name a good portion of his cabinet. Remember the story of Mr. Prince and the faux birthmark? What 15-year-old kid do you know who could draw Gorbachev's birthmark from memory or even tell you who Gorbachev was? Back in 4th grade, when Aaron was interviewed by the local newspaper about tensions in the Middle East, he responded, "We shouldn't let them," talking about Saddam Hussein, "take over a lot of places. We should go over there for the sake of young people he's killing with gas." His warrior spirit was seeping through even then, and he was only 9. Little did any of us know at the time, Aaron would be a part of the United States Armed Forces when Saddam Hussein was finally captured. What Aaron ultimately became was astonishing on many levels. From the first mention of his quest to become a Navy SEAL, no one ever believed a boy from Troy, Tennessee, could fulfill that dream. It was too big, too enthusiastic. I mean, a Navy SEAL? The chances of becoming an NFL football player were much better. However, Aaron never needed the confirmation of man. This matter had been settled in his heart from the beginning. Aaron knew what he was becoming. The rest of us couldn't see it, but Aaron could see it. And God could see it. Our warrior was nearly forged. Chapter 6. The Heart of a Teenager. Throughout Aaron's high school years, a lot of outside factors shaped our son. It was a beautiful thing to watch. He was growing in his relationship with Christ, and therefore keeping things healthy in his free time, for the most part. I'm not going to pretend he was impervious to trouble, but he chose friends wisely and stayed home a lot on weekend nights, rather than running with the crowd. Aaron never got himself wrapped up in drama. He had a long-term vision, and anything superfluous or potentially posing a threat to his endgame would have to take a back seat. While Aaron's heart was good-natured, full of fun, and brimming with integrity and kindness, he also had his faults. For instance, Aaron sometimes got carried away in his attempts to have a good laugh. On one occasion, he and his buddy Caleb decided it would be funny to shoot a bottle rocket into their football coach's office. Aaron's job was to get down on his belly, peer through the small space between the floor and the door, and line up the projectile for ultimate impact. Caleb waited on his knees for his cue to light the fuse. But just as the fire ignited, one of the school principals rounded the corner. Even if the boys had wanted to, there was no turning back. Both met the Board of Education in Coach Shank's office, but they swore the paddling was worth the great laugh they got. Without a doubt, Aaron's high school teachers and administrators still relive the day when the windows of their classrooms rattled because of his science project. Aaron had built a volcano filled with explosives he had collected from way too many disassembled fireworks. You can imagine what happened when the volcano erupted. He wasn't expelled, but by today's policies, he probably would have been arrested for the scare. Perhaps Aaron's high school coaches recognized and knew some of his other faults the best. During his freshman year, Aaron was cut from the basketball team for being too aggressive. Anyone who had ever played basketball with Aaron would absolutely understand that decision. Aaron wasn't cruel. He was simply too tenacious for the sport. The boy could not understand the foundational principle of the foul. It made no sense to him. If a ball was in play, wasn't it an obligation to do everything in your power to possess it? That is how his brain functioned, win or die trying. Aaron didn't believe in the middle ground. Consequently, he was much better suited for the football field. Football became his life. In our hometown, that was a very good thing. If you've ever watched Friday Night Lights, you've seen a full-screen narrative of what it's like to grow up in Big Orange Country. On game day, checkered flags flap in the wind, moms sport their oversized proud parent of number whatever buttons, and any dad who is able squeezes himself into the sacrosanct letter jacket of his glory days. At game time, the stadium swells to standing room only as the national anthem, sung by an upcoming local talent, sweeps across the field and into the bleachers, a brilliant crescendo of good old American pride. Politically correct or not, the whistle is never blown before the entire stadium bows for prayer. Aaron loved this game, and I loved watching him play it. He had an intensity unlike any other on the field. His leg would literally quiver with anticipation before each snap of the ball. Being 6'4", but weighing only 160 pounds, Aaron's favorite compliment that he ever received came when he was named Defensive Player of the Week during his sophomore year. His coach described him to our local newspaper as, quote, someone who played much bigger than his size. The football field was my first insight into how very tough my boy was. Nothing stopped him. But even on the football field, he was sometimes given a hard time for his overachieving aggression. On one occasion, we learned he had been tackling a teammate during a scrimmage with such force that the young man left the field and refused to return until the coaches, quote, did something about Aaron. Aaron was a sophomore, the teammate a senior. The coaches found it humorous and refused to discourage Aaron, but they did patiently explain that it probably wasn't a good idea to injure the starting quarterback. Aaron agreed, but still struggled with the concept. In his mind, if you couldn't run with the big dogs, you should stay on the porch. I would be remiss if I failed to mention two of the more difficult areas of Aaron's teenage years. Aaron continuously tested my patience in academics and organization. We had many battles over the condition of his bedroom, which I came to understand as simply par for the course when raising a teenage boy. However, his academic performance presented a much more complex challenge and couldn't be chalked up to simply being a teenager. Early on, Aaron was tested and recommended for advanced placement due to his high IQ. Knowing how smart he really was, it was distressing to watch him pull in less than stellar scores semester after semester. After countless discussions, endless negotiations, and knockdown dragouts while trying to help him with his homework, I realized I was fighting a battle in which victory was subjective. The synaptic transmission had finally been processed. I was not raising a student, I was raising a warrior. Average grades would have to suffice. Over time, I slowly realized that Aaron's issue was not commitment. He just lacked commitment to anything he perceived as having no value for his end game of becoming a Navy SEAL. I needed a lot of faith to wrap my mind around his ultimate goal, his calling, but once I did, life was simplified. As parents, we need to know how to choose our battles. Figure out what really matters, not to us, but to them. A lot of us have plans for our kids. They're good plans, and there's nothing wrong with those plans. However, I've seen parents refuse to acknowledge the desires and gifts hidden in their children's hushed little mouths. If our children don't comply, we scold. And while scolding may be appropriate in many situations, we have to be careful to understand that it's not appropriate in all situations. My kids will probably tell you that the best gift I ever gave them was the gift of listening as they poured out their hearts. By listening, I was able to truly know them. I'm not sure how many parents are afforded the luxury of honest, loving, open relationships with their children. But for those of you who've known that type of relationship, you know its value. A major part of my story, my heart and my loss, is difficult to share simply because it is so personal. But I feel like Aaron's story wouldn't be properly recorded if I left it unspoken. And here it is. Aaron always talked to me. It sounds simple, but almost nothing I'll share about him more profoundly defines the love, the tenderness, and the sincerity of this child I was privileged enough to watch become a man. He talked to me from the time he was a very young child up until the time he left this earth. Usually our talks would begin after everyone else went to bed. This is when Aaron did his deepest thinking, in the silence of the night. The conversations would start around 10 p.m. with, "Hey, can I ask you something?" and end around 3 a.m. with, "I love you so much, son," and "I love you too, Mom." For some reason, my opinion had weighted value for Aaron. In all humility, I never felt I deserved the right to guide this young man, one who clearly had a value system superior to most. But still, he trusted me, and the full measure of that gift was never lost on my heart. I trusted him too. While firmly remaining his parent, I was always his friend. Our long, late-night talks are treasures I'll hold in my heart for the rest of my time here on earth. During one of those talks, I led him through the sinner's prayer and watched in awe as my young son gave his heart and life to Jesus. In those solemn hours of bonding, I labored with deep empathy over every disappointment and heartache that made its way into my boy's world. We talked of failures, mine and his. We spoke of overcoming. Together we navigated the chaos and confusion of love gained and love lost. He shared his deepest fears and concerns, as well as his greatest moments of amusement, victory, and laughter. I'm sure he didn't tell me everything, but I was often surprised by the level of trust he offered me. I believe he always understood my love to be completely unconditional, from the time he was born until the day he breathed his last. I've wondered many times since Aaron's death why God chose to take my son, when his father and I shared such a healthy, loving relationship with him? I mean, couldn't he have taken someone who was monstrous to his parents, whose life brought grief rather than blessing? Anytime that thought crosses my mind, I'm quickly admonished by the principle of 2 Corinthians 10:5b, which I utilized many times over the years to restore my children's discouraged hearts. Here's what it says: we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. As I remember those faithful words of healing, I heed their advice. Upon reconfiguration, that sometimes crippling question looks more like this: thank you, God, for a life of no regrets. How inconsolable would I be today if our memories with Aaron were marked by unforgiven strife or unresolved disappointment? Chapter 7, New Places, New Faces. When Aaron was 16, Billy and I made the agonizing yet hope-filled decision to leave our lifelong home in Tennessee. The time had come for our family to follow a different path. For almost 11 months before our move, we prayed about our decision. It took more courage than we felt we could muster, but we knew in our hearts that God was leading us to move to Martin County, Florida. At the time, Aaron was in the middle of his junior year, Tara was a freshman, and Anna had just turned 5. Our journey south began on a cold winter afternoon in February 1998. After strapping little Anna into her booster seat and slamming the door on our moving van, we went to pick up Aaron and Tara from their last day of classes at Obion County Central High School. The scene at the school that day was something I will never forget. As we drove on to that familiar parking lot, the lot where even Billy had parked his truck during high school, there in the grassy lawn between the gymnasium and the first row of cars stood dozens of our children's closest friends. These were lifelong friends, ones they had started kindergarten with. These friends circled around our precious kids, heads down, tears flowing, eyes revealing a state of disbelief that this was actually happening. People don't move away from small towns in Tennessee. You're born there and you die there. That's just the way it is. With great sadness, Aaron and Tara finally crawled into the car, buckled up, and off we went. For several hours, complete silence enveloped us as we all contemplated how much of our lives was disappearing through our rearview mirror. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and oh, so many memories. Our move was an incredibly pivotal time frame in our teenagers' lives. Again, they were left with choices. Would they embrace this journey with hope and anticipation, or would they scorn the uprooting with anger and bitterness? It does my heart good to tell you that they chose wisely. While Aaron and Tara found their new world to be quite a different experience from small-town USA, they made it work. Once we settled into our new life in Florida, we had no doubt that we were in the exact place God had chosen for us. A new chapter began, and we were certain it would be filled with purpose. One of our top priorities after moving was seeking out a new church. As believers in Christ, we have always understood the biblical principles God laid out regarding being part of a church family and how much value that family adds to your everyday existence. We wanted to find a church where Aaron and Tara would have a solid youth group, a support system, plus a network of instant friends. I remember the first night we met Rex and Marty Bryant, youth pastors at First Baptist Church, Stewart. Even though we had visited the church on a few occasions, I knew our kids would never feel connected or make friends until they dove in head first. Wednesday night youth group was the only place that was going to happen. So, one Wednesday evening, I decided to walk my kids into their first youth group meeting to make introductions and to size up their level of comfort before abandoning them to complete strangers. When we reached the front of the room, the entire assemblage, with Rex and Marty in the lead, circled Aaron and Tara, mesmerized by their thick southern draws and beautiful faces. We still laugh as we recall a few of the students asking Aaron to repeat his name over and over. He would say, Arn, and one of the students would say, are you saying Arn? And he would say, no, it's Arn. And then the student would say, sorry, are you saying Arn? And really loud, he says, Arn. I could hear the frustration in Aaron's voice, and I finally had to step in. It's Aaron. The girls grinned. The guys shook his hand, and the bonding began. This youth group and its leaders quickly became Aaron and Tara's entire world. Only once in my lifetime have I witnessed such a powerful union of students and leaders who sincerely loved each other as much as they loved Christ. This was it. These new friends began filling every free hour of our two oldest children's lives. Deep, life-altering relationships were being conceived. Rex and Marty weren't your average youth leaders. Although their home overflowed with a family of their own, their students were as much a part of their existence as their natural-born babies. On a typical Saturday, the entire youth group spent the morning at the beach for surf and sun, and then headed to a park to play some flag football. Nightfall usually found them all at the Bryant home, watching movies and eating pizza. Rex was the epitome of a manly man. He had played football throughout high school and college and had brilliantly maintained his strong physique. He was handsome and quick with a smile, but his best attribute was his fierce love for Christ. He bonded with Aaron instantly, and more often than not, Rex was the one assigned to cover Aaron during those Saturday afternoon football games. During Aaron's memorial service in Florida, Rex shared the story of the first time he ever came up against Aaron in football. This is how it went. When it was time for my side to be on defense, we were all divvying up who were going to cover. Nobody went over to Aaron's side, so I had to. Of course, I was about 37 at that point, going against a 16-year-old spry young man. I remember the first play. I don't know what happened, but I never saw him go by me. I looked over my shoulder, and he had a ball in his hand headed to the end zone. Well, I decided in my heart that there is no way this young man's going to ever do that to me again. So we spent the next hour and a half fighting for 5 yards. And the only way that whole skirmish ended was with me finally getting hurt and having to leave the field. And Aaron did it with total respect, by the way. "Oh, Rex, I'm sorry. Oh, that must have hurt. Oh, Rex." I'd never prayed for an injury before in my life, but that day God gave me a blown hamstring, and I was grateful for it. It put me on the sideline. We finished the game, went home, and ate steaks. This couple exemplified the way life should work and what marriage should look like. Aaron often told me, "I want a family like theirs one day." I deeply loved the Bryants for their willingness to embrace, nurture, and navigate my kids through what could have been a very difficult transition. Aaron spent his first summer in Florida learning to have city fun. Still honing his stealth warrior skills, he would come home with hilarious stories of he and his friends, armed with air horns, slithering into the shrubs at several of the local golf courses. You can visualize the rest. With the young men from this youth group, Aaron learned, among many other things, to explore and enjoy the endless mysteries of the great Atlantic Ocean. Being a farm boy all his life, the open water was new to him. His buddies still tell stories about their fear of Aaron drowning while learning to surf. The problem with Aaron was he would never give up. The issue wasn't if he would be able to do something. The questions were, how long will this take me to master, and will I die trying? Besides the time in the ocean, these boys spent hundreds of hours on their four-wheelers, with Aaron leading the way in fearless abandon. Before you can understand what I mean by fearless abandon, you need to understand that in Florida, vast areas of open land are not known as fields. They're much more sophisticated collections of mud. Here, they're called wetlands or preserves, and they do not exist for anyone's enjoyment. They exist for loftier purposes, and it's not taken lightly when a teenager has the audacity to utilize them for recreation of any kind. All of that means that any time the boys were four-wheeling or mudding, they were looking out for the law. Aaron saw this as a challenge, one he believed he could win. Aaron's best friend Jason shared a story at the memorial service in Florida that had all of us rolling with laughter over one of their wetlands episodes. The way he told it, just around dusk one night, the woods suddenly lit up with headlights from a search team. The police had obviously been notified of the kids' presence in the wetland, which we affectionately referred to as the Holy Land. Aaron, considering himself the SEAL in training, shouted for everyone to cut their engines and hide. Jason explained to us that any time they went out, Aaron would come with a set of directions for routes of egress and a regroup station should they get split up while under pursuit. That night, Aaron left the others behind a tree and belly crawled into the darkness on a surveillance mission to see what challenges they faced should they be forced to make a run for it. In Jason's words, "Next thing I know, I hear leaves crunching and mud splashing. Here comes Aaron blazing through the woods as fast as his legs could carry him. Never breaking stride, he mounts the four-wheeler John Wayne style and screams, 'Run! They've got dogs!'" Always the leader, my boy was. Over the years, Aaron and I developed a never-ending battle of trying to outdo each other with pranks. We both loved the sheer childlike joy of pranking people. I will admit that he absolutely bested me one day when I pulled up to a red light. We were in the far left of 3 lanes of traffic, and Aaron was in the passenger seat. Suddenly, I heard those famous words, "Hey, Mom, watch this." Aaron proceeded to wad up a huge chunk of a napkin, stuff it in his mouth until it was completely saturated, whip the straw out of his soda, and shoot the spit wad onto the driver's window of an unsuspecting motorist 2 lanes over, navigating his shot between the cab and trailer of a semi in the middle lane. Just as the driver looked in our direction, Aaron threw himself to the floorboard, and I was left staring at a man who looked like he wanted to rip my head off as the slimy wet paper slid down his driver's side window. This was life with Aaron, and I loved every second of it. He was a boy whose laughter could melt the hardest of hearts. It was so genuine, so hilarious. Even after he became a big, strong weapon of defense for the U.S. military, he would belly laugh like a child when something struck him as funny. Mouth open, head thrown back, eyes squinted in pure hilarity. You couldn't help but laugh along. Chapter 8. Broken Heart, Broken Dreams. For years, Aaron researched what it took to become a Navy SEAL. He learned that the Navy had developed a separate program for men who already knew they wanted to be SEALs, those who wanted to bypass regular naval service and go directly to the teams after enlisting. This process was called the SEAL Challenge Program. The first step toward entering this famed program was the PST, Physical Screening Test. Aaron would need to be able to swim either breaststroke or side stroke for 500 yards, which is 5 lengths of a football field, in 12 minutes and 30 seconds. Next, he would have to do at least 50 push-ups in 2 minutes, 50 sit-ups in the next 2 minutes, 6 pull-ups, and then run 1.5 miles in boots and long pants in less than 11 minutes. These were the minimum requirements at that time. The expectations for unhindered advancement were much higher. If Aaron passed the PST, he would continue on to Navy boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois. After that, he would need to master Operations Specialist A School at Dam Neck Annex in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Navy A School is an intense 3-month-long course on combat and command control systems. After successful completion of both boot camp and Navy A School, he would be assigned a date to report to Coronado, California for BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Indoctrination. There he would be challenged with an even more intense PST before finally earning the privilege of joining the next BUDS class. During the summer before his senior year of high school, Aaron started testing himself to see just how challenging the PST would be. He trained like a madman, day in and day out. But even with all his training, Aaron still managed to save plenty of time for fun. Spitball wars at local pizza places, surfing, flag football, concerts, beach time, and a whole lot of bonding. The summer between his junior and senior years was truly a summer to remember. And then came fall. Aaron's new Florida coaches had heard of his skills on the football field. They had seen the game tapes forwarded by his coaches in Tennessee and were more than anxious to put him to work. As practices began, Aaron's strengths became evident. So much so that his coach, who typically didn't allow players to work both sides of the line, made Aaron not only a wide receiver but also a defensive end. In the week leading up to the first game of his senior season, Aaron was asked to try his hand at defensive back, free safety. Aaron felt extremely honored by the opportunity and realized that things were falling into place. Since college football recruiting was much heavier in Florida than Tennessee, Aaron thought he might actually have the chance to receive a scholarship and play a little college football before entering the Navy. On a Thursday afternoon, the day before the season opener, I arrived at the football stadium in time to catch the last hour of Aaron's practice. As soon as I reached the field, however, I quickly saw that something was very wrong. The entire team and all the coaches were huddled around a single player who was lying on the ground, writhing in pain. Aaron. My heart sank as I ran on the field, everyone waving me in closer. Aaron's coach met me halfway and said, "It's real bad, Mrs. Vaughn. It's his knee. You need to get him to the hospital." After all the necessary medical tests were completed, we learned that Aaron had obliterated the anterior cruciate ligament, ACL, in his left knee, and had severely torn all 3 remaining ligaments. Surgery was the only option. After a day or 2 of pretty serious depression, my boy came back like a lion. He said, "I'll get the surgery. I will get well. I can still play college ball. I can still do anything I put my mind to. This is mind over matter, Mom. I can beat this." I had no doubt he was correct. Just like his encounter with White Cow all those years before, he was down, but he certainly wasn't out. The ACL replacement surgery was seamless, and rehab went well. Once cleared for physical activity, Aaron was fitted for a special brace to support the injured joint, and the hard work of rebuilding his speed, strength, and agility began. He and I spent countless hours on the street in front of our home, working that knee with every contraption known to man. We used runner's parachutes, jumping shoes, speed shoes, you name it, we bought it. With tape marking off 40 yards, I timed Aaron until he gained a consistent speed of 4.4 to 4.5 seconds, a remarkable time for a 6'4" tall man. Aaron had made a full, astonishing recovery, and his drive and tenacity blew everyone away. With his senior football season awash, Aaron's coaches did everything they could to get him that scholarship he had hoped for. Noting his courage, desire, and speed, colleges began sending letters. Interest had once again been piqued. A few months before graduation, during an after-school pickup game of basketball, Aaron landed oddly and twisted his knee. At least he thought he had twisted his knee. Tests revealed he had once again obliterated his ACL. Hopes for college football were over. And while that was a very hard reality to accept, Aaron still believed in his heart he could get the ligament replaced again, rehab as aggressively as he had before, and still be able to fulfill his real lifelong dream of becoming a SEAL. But when his surgeon, one of the top orthopedics in the nation, went in for the second repair, he returned a few hours later with a life-shattering revelation. He said, "Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn, there was nothing I could do. There was too much damage, nothing left of Aaron's knee to attach the new ACL to. I'm truly sorry." The surgeon went on to explain that Aaron would spend the rest of his life somewhat handicapped, and that he would never be able to participate in any physical activity again without the use of a special brace. No words are capable of describing the loss Aaron experienced upon learning his new fate. Every dream he had ever dreamed, every vision of his future, every sacrifice solidified in sweat and blood, was over. As the anesthetic fog lifted, his devastating reality began to settle. He would never be a Navy SEAL. While grieving this tremendous loss with my son, I couldn't help but wonder why God had so radically denied Aaron the chance to live out the calling we all believed he had placed on Aaron's life. At the exact period of time when Aaron was preparing to spread his proverbial wings and fly off into his glorious destiny, he had instead been caged. It seemed like such a cruel twist of fate. But my faith that God still had a plan did not waver, nor did Aaron's. We both knew that God's ways are higher than our ways. His plans are loftier than our own. One of Aaron's favorite verses in the Bible was Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. We had learned to trust Him through many highs and lows, and therefore had great confidence that whatever the future held would be for Aaron's good. We also knew that God certainly meant him no harm in what He had allowed to happen. However, trusting and claiming that verse still didn't make Aaron's new reality easy. After a lifetime of believing he had been created for a monumental purpose, Aaron was now faced with the difficult task of resolving himself to a life of normalcy. His purpose was in question. He needed to find his new place in this world, but had no idea where to begin looking. Something deep inside him changed in the days following the surgeon's news. The smallness of Aaron's once oversized grin reminded us constantly that he was struggling with this transition. One afternoon, he came home from school with an odd, kind of hesitant look on his face. I knew there was a big ask on its way. He said, "Mom, do you think I could go back to Tennessee for the last few weeks of school so I can graduate from Obion Central?" Admittedly, I was taken aback by his request. But how on earth could I say no? He had spent almost his entire school career with his classmates from Obion County. I would have done anything to lift his spirits and give him something to look forward to. So I said, "Wow, I guess. I don't see why not." Aaron quickly said, "I could live with Daddy Frank and Nanu." Those were the names that Aaron had given my parents when he first learned to talk. He went on to say they wouldn't mind. And I said back, "No, I'm sure they'd love that. I guess it's fine with me, but of course, I'll have to clear it with Dad, hun, and both schools." Aaron quickly said back, "Thanks, Mom. It would really mean a lot to me." With little hesitation, Billy agreed, and within a couple of weeks, all the paperwork was completed. Aaron moved north, settled himself into one of my parents' spare bedrooms, and quite honestly, had the time of his life. The fog of depression lifted, and his mental state improved. About 6 weeks later, Billy, Tara, Anna, and I traveled to Tennessee for Aaron's graduation. Even with all of the fun Aaron had had with his old friends, he was ready to return to Florida. Shortly after moving home again, Aaron landed a job at an elite golf course on Jupiter Island, Florida. Because of his tremendous personality, impeccable work ethic, and can-do attitude, Jupiter Island Club offered Aaron a full scholarship to study golf course management at a local college. Aaron jumped at the invitation and embraced his new career with hope and excitement. This was my first encounter with Karen Vaughn, the student. The same child who had brought home less than stellar grades for most of his prior academic career suddenly brought home straight A's nearly every semester. Just like I had figured out years before, the question wasn't a matter of capability with Aaron, but instead a matter of logic. Will this be important to me? If so, I'll give it my best shot. If not, get it out of my way. Academically, Aaron breezed through college and graduated with honors. However, he didn't bother walking for his diploma. Aaron lived and died by a creed so unfamiliar to most. He never wanted the attention of others. He didn't view his accomplishments as something to be celebrated or publicly acknowledged. He simply kept his head down, worked hard, and embraced the invaluable reward of personal satisfaction. Chapter 9, That Fateful Day. Aaron's life had settled into a pretty solid routine by the time he turned 20. His job at the golf course suited him well, and he started making plans with the help of his boss to pursue a supervisory job. At the close of a typical workday, Aaron would spend time either surfing, fishing, or just horsing around with family and friends. He believed in having fun and making memories, and he was doing just that. Little did Aaron and our entire family know how the events of 2001 would change us and our family's history. In August of that year, my father, at age 66, lost his 4-year battle with cancer. His death was a hard loss for our family. He fought valiantly right up until the end. I had never seen anyone battle cancer with such dignity. His primary concern through every setback was making sure none of us worried. If he became uncomfortable, he would quietly dismiss himself to another room, making no fuss over the extreme pain he was experiencing. We all noticed him getting weaker, yet his spunk, love for life, and laughter made it difficult to believe his journey was nearly over. Dad and Aaron were a lot alike. Dad loved adventure, and perhaps that's where Aaron inherited his adventurous spirit. Dad served in the U.S. Army in the post-Korean War era, and Aaron deeply respected Dad's service. On a lighter note, Aaron also deeply respected the fact that my dad built a urinal into the wall of his garage, right beside his refrigerator full of beer. Aaron swore that one day when he built a home of his own, he would do the same. He thought it was the coolest move ever. Dad and Aaron shared a lifelong admiration and love for each other. Aaron had that type of bond with each of his grandparents, unique, individual relationships, but all with equal amounts of love. In May 2001, Mom and Dad visited us in Florida for our daughter Tara's high school graduation. On one of the last days of their trip, Dad asked Aaron to take him mudding in his four-wheel drive Jeep. Dad's spine was loaded with tumors at the time, so Mom and I vehemently fought the idea. But Dad was determined to go. Maybe he knew in his heart this would be his last big outing with the boy he had loved so dearly for the past 20 years. Dad crawled up into Aaron's Jeep and off they went to the Holy Land, both of them grinning ear to ear. About an hour or so later, Billy, my mom, and I made a quick trip to the store. On our way back home, my mom, with a completely perplexed tone, interrupted our ongoing chit-chat, saying, "Hey, is that Rhodey?" That was her nickname for my dad. Billy threw on the brakes, made a quick U-turn, and drove back up the road to find Dad walking down the sidewalk toward the nearest service station. The two boys had buried the Jeep in the mud, and Dad was headed out to get some help. Once we all regrouped, Dad and Aaron couldn't stop laughing about their escapade. 2 months later, we stood in a circle around Dad's hospital bed, watching him die. My dad was a proud man, and had spent a good deal of his life wavering in his faith. In the last few years, however, his faith in Christ solidified, and he knew exactly where he would go when he breathed his final breath. Our entire family was blessed enough to be in the room to hear him say, "I see his face." My mom rushed to his side, grasping both of his hands, and said, "Is it Jesus, honey?" My dad whispered, "Yes." My mom said, "Is he beautiful?" And my dad simply said, "Yes." And just like that, it was over. Dad's heart didn't stop beating until 3 days later, but he never regained consciousness. Aaron's heart broke. We all broke. We felt certain we had just endured the most unspeakably horrifying event any of us would ever witness. We were wrong. Like any adult in America, I remember with great clarity every detail of my morning on September 11, 2001. I was working as a landscape designer in South Florida and had just stopped by one of my job sites to check on the crew. As I stepped out of the car, I could sense something was amiss. Our site supervisor headed toward me, explaining nervously that a plane had struck one of the World Trade Center buildings where a sister of one of our crew members was working. While that young man struggled to reach his sister and verify her safety, the rest of us attempted to understand how a plane could accidentally crash into the tower. It hadn't been reported yet that it was a passenger plane, so we all assumed it was a small, private aircraft. Maybe the pilot had a heart attack. Maybe he was intoxicated. Maybe he had simply lost control. We were curious and concerned as we continued sorting through blueprints, while standing near our only source of news, a truck radio. 10 minutes later, we were terrified. "Another plane has struck the second tower." There was a long pause on the radio. "We can no longer consider this an accident. I believe we are witnessing a terror attack on the United States of America," explained the broadcaster. It seemed as though, for just a moment, time stood still. Finally composing ourselves, we all ran to our cars, flipped on our own radios, and began tracking down our loved ones. By late afternoon, Billy and I and our 3 children sat huddled in our home in a complete state of shock. Glued to the news channels, we searched our minds for answers, trying to make sense of what we were witnessing. Air traffic at a complete standstill for the first time in our lives. Roads closed in and out of New York City, hopeless men and women jumping to their deaths as smoke billowed from windows behind them. Replays of passenger planes striking the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, a downed airliner in a vacant field in Pennsylvania. Ash-covered, bloodied men and women, terrified, dumbfounded, stunned, running frantically through the streets of Lower Manhattan as the first, then the second tower collapsed. As these images of sheer horror flashed across the screen, an unspeakable anger flashed in my son's eyes. An intense and righteous anger that I immediately knew would not, could not, go unanswered. As the sun began to set on that monstrous day, an intense, suffocating blanket of darkness covered our land, and without words we all knew The shining city upon a hill would never be the same. And there would be war. Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. These words were spoken by President George W. Bush from Barksdale Air Force Base. In the following days, an astonishing story of bravery and sacrifice emerged. A story of common men and women with lions' hearts, and a story that would inspire the nation and revive our crippled spirit. A story that rose from the ashes of a downed Boeing 757, call sign Flight 93. In our home, we grieved as we listened to family members recount their frantic conversations of tender goodbyes and whispered words of "I love you," and "if I don't make it." We heard the brave, awe-inspiring rumbles of courage. "It's happening. It's up to us. I think we can do it." Then finally, Todd Beamer's stoic battle cry, which in one instant demolished, rebuilt, and refueled the heart of every patriot across this nation. Let's roll. The 40 selfless heroes on board Flight 93 did not sit in their seats and pray that somehow their government would come to their rescue. They didn't bow in fear to a terrorist enemy determined to destroy them. They acted. Dressed in business suits and ties, blue jeans and T-shirts, these everyday Americans denied the terrorists their most fatal blow, a strike on our nation's capital. They would die so others could live. And there it was, that indomitable spirit of the America Aaron knew, the America he loved, the America of its founders who were willing to sacrifice their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for this dream of a land where men could be free. Todd Beamer's challenge would not go unanswered. Months later, on Aaron's 21st birthday, June 24th, 2002, he finished work on the plush golf course of Jupiter Island Club. And instead of coming directly home to the birthday dinner awaiting him, or making plans for a big night out with his buddies, he made a pit stop, the United States Navy Recruiting Center. When Aaron arrived home, his tone was deliberate and his countenance somber. We knew he had something to tell us. As we sat down at the dinner table, the words finally left his lips. He said, "I joined the SEAL Challenge program today, Mom and Dad. I leave for boot camp in November." Silence. Billy and I both struggled for the correct response. After a few seconds, Billy spoke tenderly. "Son, how do you think you can make it through buds with your knee?" Aaron's response was quick. "I can do this, Dad. I know this is what I'm supposed to do." Aaron was confident and unwavering. I withdrew mentally as I began pondering the magnitude of what Aaron had just done. My chest tightened with an odd fusion of pride and fear. While moved by his willingness to take his place in America's military history, this was no game. We were at war. U.S. forces were dying as we spoke. Billy's voice snapped me back to reality. "You do realize if you don't make it as a SEAL, you'll still be in the Navy, right?" Aaron was quick. "I'll make it, Dad. I'm going to be a SEAL. I've always known it." I deeply respected Aaron for his choice. And though my mother's heart wanted to shield him from harm, to demand he call and retract his signature, I knew it was pointless and wrong. If not Aaron, who? And if not now, when? A long-silenced call born in my son's heart many years earlier, a call known well by all who knew Aaron well, beckoned once again. And with the irrepressible character of every patriot whose blood-stained boots blazed the trails of freedom, Aaron answered that call with a resounding yes. Billy and I truly honored and respected his desire to serve his nation, but we couldn't imagine how he planned to accomplish the overwhelming task he had placed before himself. With the condition of his left knee, his choice made no sense. I remember asking Aaron, "Does the Navy know about your knee?" His answer was almost comical. "No, they'd have never let me in." Aaron then commenced to tell us that, unbeknownst to any of us, he had begun a training program shortly after the towers fell and was testing himself privately. He had done extensive research online to find exercises that would build muscle in order to stabilize the joint on its own. Over the previous 3+ years, he had worn a knee brace which, of course, would need to be left behind since its presence would betray his secret. If the Navy had known about his condition, his request to join the program would have been flat out denied. On June 25th, I once again became actively engaged in the knee rebuilding process. Aaron and I would have almost 5 months of working together until he left for boot camp, and his commitment to training and preparing was unparalleled. We spent countless hours online watching videos, reading article after article, and learning exactly what would be expected of him should he pass the early stages and make it to the famed land of Coronado, California, and the BUD/S training facility, where SEAL dreams are either shattered or fulfilled. His eyes would light up when he spoke about the possibility of one day crossing that 2-mile-long suspension to greatness, the Coronado Bridge. Before we could turn around twice, the day arrived. Aaron was leaving for boot camp. We loaded up the car after lunch on a Sunday afternoon and drove him to that same recruiter's office he had stopped by on his way home from work months earlier. We sat in the office, almost paralyzed. As silly jokes were made to lighten the mood, it was all white noise to me. My boy was leaving. I knew in my heart that if he achieved success, he would never be back. But how could I hope for anything different? After having conditioned himself for SEAL qualification training, Navy boot camp came and went with relatively little effort on Aaron's part. We attended the graduation ceremony in Great Lakes, Illinois, with hearts so full of pride that we thought they would explode. Then came A School in Virginia Beach. Billy and I visited Aaron during that portion of training, and together the three of us took our first trip to Washington, D.C. A massive protest was taking place that day at the Washington Monument, making it very difficult to enjoy any of the prominent sights. However, our true interest lay at a place none of us had ever been, a place that rested on the other side of the Potomac, Arlington National Cemetery. As we entered the gates to Arlington, our eyes fell upon a now all too familiar sign and its sacred words, "Welcome to Arlington National Cemetery, our nation's most sacred shrine. Please conduct yourselves with dignity and respect at all times. Please remember, these are hallowed grounds." I struggled to breathe as I stood in awe, forced to look full in the face the sacrifices that had been made on my behalf. Row after row, field after field, line after line of white headstones. Billy, Aaron, and I walked those grounds for hours in silent reverence. We hardly spoke a word. It was one of the most memorable and overwhelming days of my entire life up to that point. And looking back now, I'm certain we walked on all 4 roads that now create the frame around Aaron's grave. Part 2, The Warrior. Chapter 10, BUD/S Class 248. In late 2003, Aaron's name hit the roll for BUD/S Class 248. The phone call that followed was hilarious. He said, "Mom, I get to do a Winter Hell Week. I can't believe it. This is so freaking awesome." And I said, "That's awesome, son, but tell me though, why is it exactly awesome that you're doing it in the winter? That doesn't sound like a good thing to me." And Aaron said, "Because then everyone knows you didn't just make it. You made it under the worst condition. Everyone wants to say they had a Winter Hell Week. I mean, the water is like in the 40s and 50s, and so you're not just wet, you're wet and freezing all the time. There's a huge dropout rate." I couldn't help but laugh. Like the knee wasn't going to be challenging enough, he needed the harshest weather conditions as well. I loved his spirit so much. Before the long-awaited trip to Coronado, the Navy provided Aaron a brief trip home to celebrate with family and friends and to say goodbye. I remember finding it very difficult to control the battle raging in my heart. At his send-off party, I would look across the room periodically and see this grown man where my little boy should have been. I would smile with pride as I watched his buddies slap him on the back and laugh about who knows what. But at the same time, my heart felt as though it would explode from the pressure of knowing how radically life was about to change. Aaron had been there from the beginning. For 22 years, I had not known a day without Aaron in it. I couldn't imagine a life without him. It was surreal. The next morning, he would begin his 2,500-mile trip to glory, to legendary status, should he succeed. By this time, little doubt was left in my heart that Aaron would make it. He had been created for this moment. He had always known his destiny. And while circumstances had interfered with his plans, they had had no effect on God's. Early the next morning, we woke up and loaded the Jeep Wrangler. Billy and Aaron checked the oil, jiggled the battery cables, and then slammed the hood. The sound shook me. It was time. My baby was really leaving. Wiping my eyes, I regained my composure and snapped a picture as Aaron, with a huge smile plastered on his face, hugged his dad goodbye. And then I took another as he backed out of our driveway. I spent the next months in what seemed like constant prayer. BUDS is a 6-month intensive training course with Hell Week occurring at the 4-week mark. For all those who survive Hell Week, a brown shirt lies on the shoreline, the last name stenciled on the chest. Once you earn the right to a brown shirt, you've turned a significant corner and will most likely at some point make it into the teams. Near midnight one December evening, our phone rang. It was Aaron. He said, "I got my brown shirt," but Aaron's words weren't enunciated that clearly because his tongue was so swollen from dehydration, he had to repeat the phrase 3 or 4 times before I realized what he had said. Emotion overcame me, and all I could do was cry. I broke down. "I'm so proud of you, son. I am so incredibly proud of you." Then Billy started crying. Billy and I looked at each other in total disbelief. This had actually happened. Aaron was going to be a Navy SEAL. All those hopes, all that hard work, and all that belief in God had paid off. Our boy would live his dream. In an unexpected act of kindness from the hands of his BUDS instructors, Aaron received permission to come home immediately following Hell Week to participate in his sister Tara's wedding. While his trip was quick, its value was immeasurable. Every word he uttered throughout that weekend had our full attention. His heart was still racing with excitement over what he had just survived. He struggled as he tried to help us envision what Hell Week had been like. Just after sundown on a Sunday, Hell Week began with a hair-raising Normandy Beach-like scenario of absolute chaos. Their doors kicked open by instructors firing weapons, loaded with blanks of course, artillery simulators blasting, and loud whistles and bellowed commands piercing their ears. The men were then forced outside where even greater chaos ensued. They were knocked to the ground with high-powered water jets while gunfire, explosions, commands, and screeching whistle blows continued. My mind reeled, trying to imagine in some small way what it must have been like. As Aaron spoke, we could almost hear the deafening rounds and smell the cordite. And that was just the first few minutes of a hellacious event that would continue for another 5 days and nights. Unimaginably, in that roughly 120-hour block of constant physical and mental stress, Aaron and the other men had only 4 hours of sleep, total. We cringed through the stories of overcoming hour upon hour in a near-freezing ocean where body cavity temperature checks were as much a part of survival as the few and far between periods of rest. As if the freezing surf wasn't torture enough, the would-be warriors were repeatedly forced to dip their frozen, sand-covered bodies in horse troughs full of iced water. We physically ached as we looked at all the areas of raw flesh on Aaron's body, brought about from a constant covering of sand grating against his skin through every exercise, every movement. We also noticed large chunks of hair missing from his scalp. This, we learned, came from hours of running with a 110-pound inflatable boat overhead, pounding his skull with every footfall. We laughed together as Aaron told about some of his more lighthearted memories. He said, "I'm telling you, it was crazy. You never sleep, just like 15 minutes at a time here and there, so your head is just messed up all the time." Then laughing out loud, eyes squinted in hilarity while picturing the memory, he continued, "I even hallucinated a couple times. One morning, I looked down in my cereal bowl and I swear I saw the Cowardly Lion off The Wizard of Oz staring up at me, laughing and like mocking me." My eyes welled with tears, though, as he described the final moments of Hell Week. It's just craziness and chaos. You don't know what time it is, and you're not really sure what day it is, so you don't have any idea how much longer it's going to last. The instructors had us lock arms and face the water, and we all thought it was going to be just another round of surf torture. Then all of a sudden, someone told us to turn around, and there, stretched out across the berm, was every one of our instructors. One of them was holding an American flag. Our brown shirts were laying in the sand right there in front of them with our names stenciled on the chest, and we knew it. It was over. His voice shifted to a more serious tone as his mind went back to the moment, and he almost choked up as the words left his mouth. Then our commander shouted, "Hell Week is secured." It was over. Aaron's body was ravaged, but his spirit screamed with satisfaction, pride, and confidence. You could see it in his eyes. Never again would he face a challenge too great to overcome. He had experienced firsthand the true meaning of the gospel he had read so many times. I can do all things through Christ, who gives me strength. Philippians 4:13. Many have asked where Aaron's tenacity came from to endure and conquer such insurmountable obstacles. While his faith in God's call in his life was unshakable, I'm certain the principles we taught him throughout his childhood and young adult years also played a significant role. While Billy and I oftentimes had different approaches to teaching our kids, we worked together to teach them the importance of properly handling success and failure. I tended to be my children's greatest cheerleader and wanted to instill in them that they could accomplish anything they put their minds to, while Billy's focus was more on helping our children see and understand areas of their lives and character where they could improve. Children need a balance of praise and criticism in order to develop a healthy self-worth. We can't praise them when they're doing something poorly and expect them to give more or try harder the next time. We need to teach them that failure is real and entirely possible, but we also need to teach them that failure is not final and that they can accomplish great things. The purpose of allowing failure is to build character and teach that anything worth having requires effort. We allowed Aaron to fail, which made his moments of success all that much sweeter in his eyes. One of the other concepts we instilled in our children was, you don't quit until the whistle blows. Remember the star quarterback that Aaron kept blasting back in high school? That was a perfect example. It's fine that he had to be called off. At least everyone on that team knew Aaron could be trusted to give it his all the time. His teammates respected him for that. We also taught them when the going gets tough, the tough get going. You don't cry when you want to quit. You push and push and push until you feel like you've given more than you had in you. Only then will you realize what you're truly capable of achieving. As perfect as Tara's wedding weekend was, it was over in a flash, and we were saying goodbye again. Aaron returned to Coronado to complete Phase 1 and the remaining months of his training. Many fall by the wayside in the second leg, dive phase, where men are pushed past all reasonable limits in underwater survival. But Aaron sailed through. I attribute his success in dive phase to our move to Florida and his endless hours in the surf and learning not to panic when a wave held him under. With undeviating calculation, God had prepared Aaron for everything. The fight and endurance he cultivated to overcome his knee injury gave him the confidence and determination he needed to get through Phase 1. The surfer years in sunny South Florida shoved him through Phase 2. Then came Phase 3, land warfare. If his childhood hadn't prepared him for that, nothing would have. He knew weapons, he had fast roped down hundreds of vines, he had blown things up, and he had found his way out of the woods by the position of the sun so many times he could do it with his eyes closed. All those skills had been developed on the training ground of our small farm back home in the land of cotton and Big Orange football. Phase 3 was nearly effortless. On April 30th, 2004, our family arrived at The Grinder, the large concrete asphalt testing ground where giants are made or men are broken, and proudly watched as Aaron took his place as one of the few in history who had successfully completed BUDS training. He had overcome unimaginable odds to secure his place in history, to be named among the elite, to be called a U.S. Navy SEAL. His class, which had started with around 160 men, finished with less than 10 of those originals. Helmets of all those who had wrung out, who had given up short of reaching the goal, lined the grinder that day. When a man has reached his limit, he removes his helmet, lays it down, and tugs the rope of a huge brass bell that hangs on the edge of this paved square of victory or defeat. This is an act of no return. During one of our conversations, Aaron explained to me that in order to become a Navy SEAL, you have to want it so badly that you're willing to die for it. And if you should actually stop breathing, you then have to be willing to trust those around you enough to know they'll resuscitate you. If you can put your life in their hands and release your welfare and safety to them completely, then, and only then, can you earn the title Frogman, Team Guy. I believe there's great beauty in the fact that God sees our entire story, start to finish, and patiently allows us to be confounded and even sometimes angered by our own lack of vision. Because of His mercy, He lovingly utilizes our weakness to expose His greatness, and in so doing builds our faith, our trust, our hope. Such was the case with Aaron's irreparable knee injury. Though I've never seen it, I've been told Aaron's name is on a self-descriptive plaque at the Buds compound in Coronado titled, "First Time, Every Time." Aaron, with no ACL in his left knee, completed every evolution required of him on his first attempt. By becoming a Navy SEAL and ultimately rising all the way to SEAL Team 6, Aaron accomplished the near impossible. There was only one plausible explanation: God. God had been there every moment, and Aaron never took that for granted. He never beat his chest and said, "Look what I did." Instead, I very often heard him say, in complete humility, "I can't believe God has let me do this." He was always quick to point all the glory and all the praise to his Creator and Sustainer, Jesus Christ. Our warrior was now fully trained and ready. Chapter 11, A Creed to Live By. The SEAL Ethos. In times of war or uncertainty, there is a special breed of warrior ready to answer our nation's call. A common man with uncommon desire to succeed. Forged by adversity, he stands alongside America's finest special operations forces to serve his country, the American people, and protect their way of life. I am that man. My trident is a symbol of honor and heritage. Bestowed upon me by the heroes that have gone before, it embodies the trust of those I have sworn to protect. By wearing the trident, I accept the responsibility of my chosen profession and way of life. It is a privilege that I must earn every day. My loyalty to country and team is beyond reproach. I humbly serve as a guardian to my fellow Americans, always ready to defend those who are unable to defend themselves. I do not advertise the nature of my work, nor seek recognition for my actions. I voluntarily accept the inherent hazards of my profession, placing the welfare and security of others before my own. I serve with honor on and off the battlefield. The ability to control my emotions and my actions, regardless of circumstances, sets me apart from other men. Uncompromising integrity is my standard. My character and honor are steadfast. My word is my bond. We expect to lead and be led. In the absence of orders, I will take charge, lead my teammates, and accomplish the mission. I lead by example in all situations. I will never quit. I persevere and thrive on adversity. My nation expects me to be physically harder and mentally stronger than my enemies. If knocked down, I will get back up every time. I will draw on every remaining ounce of strength to protect my teammates and to accomplish our mission. I am never out of the fight. We demand discipline. We expect innovation. The lives of my teammates and the success of our mission depend on me, my technical skill, tactical proficiency, and attention to detail. My training is never complete. We train for war and fight to win. I stand ready to bring the full spectrum of combat power to bear in order to achieve my mission and the goals established by my country. The execution of my duties will be swift and violent when required, yet guided by the very principles that I serve to defend. Brave men have fought and died building the proud tradition and feared reputation that I am bound to uphold. In the worst of conditions, the legacy of my teammates steadies my resolve and silently guides my every deed. I will not fail. After Buds, Aaron, like all those who went before him, endured 6 additional months of rigorous, exhaustive SEAL qualification training before the day came when he finally recited the SEAL ethos and received his long sought-after SEAL trident. The trident is a unique special warfare pin. All SEALs, whether officers or enlisted men, wear the same pin. No variation whatsoever. The identical pins are a reflection on how these men train together and fight together, and no man is greater than the other. They take it to the enemy as equals, a brotherhood with virtually no distinction. The trident is comprised of a golden eagle clutching a U.S. Navy anchor, Neptune's spear, and a flintlock pistol. Each portion of this emblem reflects the SEAL's character, work ethic, and skill set. The anchor symbolizes the SEAL's parent service, the Navy. On closer inspection, one will notice an inscription on the anchor, a date from times past. SEALs are taught to honor and guard the legacy handed down to them by the heroes who've gone before them. They take great pride in their roots, the Naval Combat Demolition Units and underwater demolition teams. In the eagle's right claw is Neptune's spear. Historically, the right hand signifies power, and Neptune was the ancient Roman god of the sea. This is a representation of a SEAL's most noted skill set, their uncanny ability to operate underwater. By the time a man is pinned with the trident, he's as at home beneath the sea as he is on land. The pistol, gripped by the eagle's left claw, signifies that SEALs are equally trained in land combat. It's important to note that the pistol is cocked and ready to fire. This is the life of a Navy SEAL, ready to go, ready to fight, at a moment's notice, always prepared when called upon by their nation, and never caught off guard. The eagle, our nation's symbol of freedom, indicates the SEAL's ability to insert from the air. It also characterizes their core standards: bravery, swiftness, and honor. On most military insignias, you'll find an eagle's head held high, but not so on the trident. On this badge of honor, the eagle's head is bowed low. While the eagle carries out its mission, on land, in the air, and in the sea, it does so with great humility. No need for accolades, no desire for attention. If you think for a second that a SEAL is a breed of warrior with an ounce of arrogance regarding his accomplishments, you're mistaken. These men are sifted through a complex series of mental evaluations. Those lacking the character necessary to represent the tradition of integrity and humility solidified in the SEAL community are quickly and easily weeded out. You would be hard-pressed to ever hear one of them declare their line of work in a public or private setting. If you happen to hear someone state they are a SEAL, you should immediately suspect whether or not his tale is true. Aaron exemplified this humility. If asked, he would never declare his occupation to be anything grander than, "I'm in the military." That statement was sufficient for him. There were no celebratory homecomings when he returned from war. No flags waving, no touching kisses or hugs caught on camera. As a matter of fact, he usually arrived at the airport in blue jeans, a Tennessee Vols ball cap, and one of his favorite T-shirts that said something ridiculous like "More Cowbell" or "Paper Football Champions, Class of 1982. He would come and go in total obscurity, and was more than content doing so. I have to admit that his humility and desire for obscurity was tough for me to watch. I wanted the world to know where he had been, how courageously he had defended us, and how amazing he was. But silence was the creed. I remember on one occasion visiting Aaron in his hometown of Coronado and experiencing the full wrath of dishonoring the creed. 2 young men sitting near us in a crowded restaurant started boasting about being in buds, giving loudmouth, colorful descriptions of some of the situations and instructors they had encountered. They were seeking attention, and boy, were they about to get it. Billy and I glanced at each other because we both noticed the obvious tension and shift in Aaron's demeanor. He disengaged from the conversation at our table and laser-focused on the one taking place at the next. Right in the middle of one of Billy's sentences, Aaron shoved himself up from his chair, slammed his fists on the table, rattling our plates and glasses, and unloaded on the 2 young men. "Shut your mouths. Who do you think you are, and what do you think you're doing? Get your..." Out of here, and don't ever let me see your faces again. You disgust me. Shut your stupid mouths and get out." In nearly unintelligible whispers, they replied, "Yes, sir, we're sorry, sir," and dismissed themselves. I'm pretty confident that their attempt at making it into the teams was finished. Aaron would not forget their faces. Shifting back to his gentle demeanor, Aaron turned to us and simply said, "I'm sorry." No apology was necessary. We understood. Yes, the eagle's head is bowed low on the coveted trident. A raised and proud head draws attention. A bowed head works and achieves with no accolades required or requested. But don't mistake the humility and determination of a SEAL and his teammates as an inability to have fun and take full advantage of the circumstances surrounding them. These men live, and they live large. When they're working, no one works harder. Likewise, when they're playing, few play harder. Laughter keeps them balanced. And they all seem to be drawn to extreme adventure, living to tell some pretty fascinating stories. Aaron took up dirt bike riding as his form of release. I'll probably never know the full extent of what happened one particular day, but I do know it started with a "hey y'all, watch this" jump in the Baja Desert. It ended at the hospital emergency room with a concussion and a few fractures, including a fractured scapula, an injury I understand is very difficult to acquire. Since these men are so highly trained and invested in by our military, Aaron was respectfully asked to retire the bike and take up safer forms of recreation. I'm not certain he ever fully complied. Because Navy SEALs get to hone their skills at the top training facilities around the world, Aaron often came home with entertaining stories. They flipped four-wheelers down mountainous terrains, wrecked cars, flipped golf carts, and on the stories went. It seemed like they destroyed everything they laid their hands on. At times, they were even challenged to see how much it took to destroy a new piece of equipment that was still in its trial phase. While the stories were great, the problem came when Aaron visited us and treated his father's things the same way. Oh boy, did we ever get some laughs watching Billy try to rein in his great big grown Navy SEAL son. When Aaron sat on our four-wheeler, he was no longer content to just ride it like during his teen years. He had to see how far he could wind out the engine or how much of the driveway he could jump. On his very last trip home to South Florida, he and his dad took our new boat out. Within minutes, it was totally grounded, engines wide open, Aaron laughing hysterically. As Billy puts it, the boy was hard on stuff. When Aaron drove my car, we literally slid sideways around corners, me hanging on for dear life, until finally skidding to a halt in our driveway. Aaron would be instructing me the entire time on defensive driving skills, as if one day I would need to know how to bump the back end of another car in order to fling it off the road in a tailspin. I was doing everything in my power to just hold my lunch down, much less learn anything. But man, did we ever laugh. I'll never forget the day Aaron, always the prankster, laid rubber in an elementary school parking lot in my car. He cracked up because he knew everyone would think it was me behind the wheel. That antic honestly got me riled, which of course made it all the more funny to him. Oh, he was crazy fun and funny. One night, we were having one of our serious mom-son talks, discussing tender topics about faith and family and such. Something I had been thinking about for a long time suddenly surfaced. In complete sincerity, I looked at Aaron and said, "Son, I know you're doing what you were called to do, but something has really been confusing to me. When you were young, I always believed God was telling me that one day you'd be a great missionary. I just don't get how I could have been so wrong." With his unbelievably quick wit, he laughed and said, "Well, Mom, maybe you just didn't hear him right. Maybe he was trying to tell you that I'd be a great mercenary." On another one of his trips home, Aaron decided that Anna, his baby sister, 12 years his junior, should become a cage fighter. A cage fighter. Being possibly the most fearless of all three of our children, Anna definitely had what it took. Although she was only 13 years old at the time, having her big brother speak this into her heart made her believe she wanted it too. On and on it went, day after day. Almost every time I walked through the house, the two of them would be on our bedroom floor, the only room in the house with carpet, twisted in pretzel-like positions, working on her new skill set. She stuck with Aaron for hours at a time. One morning, I walked into Anna's room before she woke up. I found her on a heating pad, nursing her aching body with a bottle of pain relievers lying on the floor. When she realized I had discovered her secret, she begged me not to tell Aaron because she was afraid it would make him go easy on her. Of course, I told him. Thankfully, that trip was the only time we heard about Anna's desire to be a cage fighter. However, her cage fighting training days gave us a source of laughter for many years. Aaron was extreme in every way. Extremely fierce, extremely gifted, extremely humble, extremely kind, and extremely encouraging. Any time you were in his presence, you felt you could conquer the world. He believed in people, and people were better and more courageous for having known him. Chapter 12. A Stroke of Love Called You. While Aaron embraced all the good in his riotous new life of extravagant adventure, something was still missing, something he had not attained: love. Aaron had always been a man who loved the idea of love. He had just never known it. He had been in a few relationships, but each ended poorly. Even in high school, Aaron never dated for the sake of dating. He was no ladies' man. He was on the lookout for a soulmate, an enduring love, and in return, he received nothing but letdowns. One day, after finalizing a pretty painful breakup with someone he had been dating for a while, he called home for a good long mom-son heart-to-heart. During that conversation, he said something I'll never forget. Since Aaron's death, I've shared the following in a playful manner, but at the time, nothing was funny about it. Mom, there's only one thing in this world I'm afraid of, and that's women. I don't think there's another thing on earth that could honestly hurt me, but they sure can. Aaron saw his desire for a committed relationship as a danger zone, and my heart broke as he told himself it would be healthier to just quit trying. I tried to encourage him. I said, son, there's someone out there for each of us, and every relationship prior to meeting that special someone will, by the grace of God, fail, if we're fortunate. You need to try seeing this as a blessing. The right one is waiting for you, and you will find her. And find her he did. God has a way of timing things that leaves no question as to whether or not he was involved in the unfolding of the events. In late 2005, Aaron was deployed in the Pacific Theater and, at one point, did a short stint in Guam. While he was there, a group of Washington Redskins cheerleaders flew in during a leg of their Armed Forces entertainment tour. After their last show, the cheerleaders visited a local hangout, and it was there, in that crowded tavern, thousands of miles from home, paths crossed and a story of love began. Kimberly spotted Aaron across the room and made her way to him. The rest, as they say, is history. Here's an excerpt from an email Aaron sent me in early 2006. It read, I honestly believe she's the one. We are crazy about each other. I'm honestly happier about her than I have ever been with any girl. She's amazing. Exactly what I've always been looking for. You'll love her. The things she wants are the same things I want, right down to God being number one in your spouse's life. It's amazing. Well, I gotta go. Hopefully I can call soon. I love y'all. Talk to you later. Aaron. Later that year, Billy and I decided that our Christmas gift to each of our children would be an all-expense-paid vacation to New York City for New Year's Eve. We included Kimberly as well, since she and Aaron were, by this time, in a very serious relationship. Aaron came home for a visit a few months before Christmas, and while here, he and Tara designed and ordered what Aaron called the Kimberly Lindberger engagement ring. It was huge. The ring was scheduled to be ready by the time Aaron returned home in December. As you can imagine, we spent hours talking about awesome, memorable ways to propose. The moment had to be big. When Aaron opened his Christmas present that morning and found the tickets to New York City, his eyes lit up. Before we could speak, we all knew what he was thinking. He and his sisters raced to the mall the next day so he could find the perfect shirt and cologne to propose in. He was a hopeless romantic. A week later, on New Year's Eve, Kimberly was the only one in our family watching the ball drop in Times Square. The rest of us were standing ready, cameras in hand, as the massive crowd descended the count. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Kimberly spun around to kiss Aaron, but he was down on one knee, ring in hand, grinning from ear to ear. Her reaction was priceless and just what he had hoped for. I will treasure that memory forever. I believe many times in life we take the real joy in full measure of a moment for granted. But this was not one of those times. Aaron and Kimberly had built and maintained a relationship while living on opposite coasts of our country. Now, they would finally be together. They would finally be one. Our son had found love, and that love was reciprocated. She said yes. In that split second, everything was as it should be. All was well, and we were happy. Our family was about to grow again. The wedding plans began, but the date was postponed longer than anyone wanted because Aaron was deploying to Afghanistan again. Before his deployment started, he came home for a good long visit and brought Kimberly along. I distinctly remember their last night in our home before heading back to Coronado, where Aaron would ship off from. Our entire family gathered for dinner, and as Billy said the blessing, he spent quite a bit of time praying for Aaron's safety through the dangerous months ahead. At that point, a strange thing happened. Kimberly began crying, and I fell apart. Not because Aaron was leaving. He had left many times before, and I was accustomed to shoving those tears to the back of my heart. I fell apart because for the first time in his life, someone besides us loved him enough to worry about him, to cry for him, to long for his return. Kimberly's tears were ribbons of beauty, caressing my soul. There it was. My son was loved, and he was loved deeply. The time had now arrived for us to let go of Aaron in a whole new way. The Bible says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." God's word references that verse at least 4 different times, and if I've learned anything from studying his word, it's this. When God says something, he means it. But when he sees fit to repeat it multiple times, you better pay attention. Over the years, I had seen marriages completely destroyed by parents who would not get out of the way, and Billy and I were determined to never be those parents. In some strange yet comforting way, my grip loosened almost instinctively. My labor of love, raising Aaron, was complete. And since almost every young wife sees her new husband as a work in progress, ready to be molded into the next phase of perfection, I was pretty comfortable handing that continuing education over to Kimberly. My work was done. Chapter 13, The Big Day. God blessed Aaron beyond his wildest imagination when Kimberly walked into his life. Both Aaron and Kimberly had waited patiently for real love and endured painful ups and downs, crushed expectations, and multiple broken hearts before finding each other. During one of their visits to Florida before the wedding, I played an old song for them, one I thought would be perfect for their big day, Larry Graham's "One in a Million You." As the oldie but goodie from 1980 bellowed out of my laptop speakers, I closed my eyes and envisioned them dancing their first dance as man and wife, looking over to me with gratitude for sharing this epic song with them. I just knew the lyrics were moving them the way they were moving me. When I finally turned to see their reaction to the song, they were struggling not to burst out laughing. Aaron said, "We like the words, Mom, but it's really old-fashioned. I think we're going to keep on looking." And they found the perfect song, The Story by Brandi Carlile. I had never heard the song before, but it couldn't have been more fitting for the two of them. I was glad they had continued their search and did not indulge me by agreeing to my selection. Kimberly and Aaron set their big day for Saturday, May 3rd, 2008. But on May 1st, they were hit squarely in the face with the unpredictable reality of military life. Earlier that week, Aaron had packed up everything he owned, left Coronado, and headed across the country to Virginia Beach, where he was scheduled to begin training and evaluation for the famed DevGru development group, better known as SEAL Team 6. Since Aaron had first dreamed of becoming a Navy SEAL, this elusive Tier 1 Operations Command was his ultimate goal. Aaron's move to the East Coast was made even better by the fact that Kimberly had grown up in the Northern Virginia area, and the relocation would allow her to be close to her family whenever Aaron deployed. On the Thursday before the wedding, Kimberly busied herself with last-minute wedding preparations while Aaron showed us around Washington, D.C. Part of the way through our day, Aaron's phone rang, and within seconds of answering, his countenance dropped. Serious stress changed the pallor of his face. We didn't know what to expect when he hung up the phone, but we had overheard enough of the conversation to know that he was speaking with his commander in California. I have to go back. There was a long pause. Then Aaron finished. They want me to be an instructor at Coronado for at least 2 years. And Billy spoke first. Oh, no, son. And Aaron said, yeah, they said there's been some incidents lately, and because of that, the training staff has to be increased. Billy tried to offer words of encouragement. He started to say, son, you know, and Aaron interrupted him. I know, Dad. I've got to trust it's what God wants from me, and it's for a good reason. We could see the stress and disappointment in his eyes. He spent the next hour or so, and a large part of the next day, making calls to see if anything could be done, if anything could be shifted, but to no avail. Although the relocation would be a tremendous setback to Aaron's goals and dreams, his greatest concern was Kimberly and how the news would affect her. He was afraid it would strip the joy from their big day. But Kimberly was incredible. She took the hit in stride and began reassuring Aaron that everything would be fine. I loved how she embraced the change and encouraged my son. So on Saturday, Aaron and Kimberly married, as planned. They spent the next day or two celebrating as newlyweds and then packed up Aaron's truck once again. Brad Kavner, Aaron's best friend, fellow SEAL, and a best man in his wedding, joined Aaron on the long, nearly 3,000-mile trip straight back to Coronado. Kimberly followed after packing up her home and notifying her workplace of the change in plans. Our boy had most assuredly found the right woman for the life that lay ahead. For the rehearsal dinner, I had created a video using their song, The Story, and a host of photos from the previous 2 years. Before the first picture appeared, the following quote from the Wonder Years scrolled the screen. It read, "All our young lives we search for someone to love, someone who makes us complete. We choose partners and change partners. We dance to a song of heartbreak and hope, all the while wondering if somewhere, somehow, there's someone perfect who might be searching for us." Everything about their story was perfect, except the ending. Chapter 14, All in God's Plan. So many times throughout life, I've been able to look back and see that what seemed to be a setback of some sort was actually a protective and loving act of God. Aaron's retraction to the West Coast training facility days before his wedding for the following 2 years was exactly that, the faithful hand of his loving God. While Navy SEALs operate at a demanding level with never-ending training, travel, and deployments, DevGru operates at an even more intense pace. Had Aaron gone straight to DevGru after the wedding, he and Kimberly would have had almost no time to grow together as a couple. Now, since he was based at the training facility, Aaron worked what was basically a 9-to-5 schedule with intermittent travel and 1 6-month deployment. We all began to see how God gave Aaron and Kimberly those 2 years in Coronado to solidify their marriage, start their family, and spend not only quality time together, but also large quantities of time. In September 2009, Aaron and Kimberly welcomed their first child into the world, Regan Carson Vaughn. He had a big name to live up to, but he also had just the parents to make sure it would be accomplished. Nothing was as beautiful as the way Aaron looked at that little boy. Aaron's world had been made whole, and life was good. Just before Regan's birth, Aaron was approached by military leaders and asked to help film a motion picture described to him as the U.S. Navy SEAL equivalent to Top Gun. The film would be used as a recruitment tool to stir interest in becoming a special operator. By this time, our country had been at war for 8 years, and reinforcements weren't coming in fast enough. Aaron agreed and took his spot in history in the now famous movie Act of Valor, which didn't hit theaters until after his death. Because he was in Coronado at the right time, God's time, Aaron's children now have footage of their bigger-than-life hero father authentically working as a Navy SEAL. For this, I am eternally grateful. Then in late 2009, Aaron temporarily left his trainer position at Coronado to deploy for the first time with a team he had dreamed of being a part of since he was a little boy. He was heading to Afghanistan with DevGru, also known as SEAL Team 6. Aaron had not yet undergone the official training for DevGru. That was to come, but he was chosen to work with them for this deployment. To say he was stoked would be an understatement. To say we were stoked would be the exact opposite. Now that he had a wife and child counting on his safe return, deployments felt much more ominous, and war was changing my son. I noticed more and more that Aaron watched in silence as the rest of us laughed and engaged each other with reckless abandon, the kind of abandon he used to be the master of. Oh, don't get me wrong. He would seize opportunities here and there to cut loose and be himself, but the old, light-hearted Aaron was gone. And understandably so. I can't imagine how surreal it must have been for Aaron to leave a battlefield where his life and the lives of his buddies were under constant threat, only to come home to a nation of sheep oblivious to the fact that anyone was sacrificing anything on their behalves. Many times, as an offering of encouragement, I sent Aaron Bible verses about King David's mighty men of valor and the love he had for them until the day he died. I reminded Aaron that David's final words were offerings of praise to those who stood beside him in the theater of battle, proving God always honored the hard and thankless work of a righteous warrior. While Aaron had no questions about the purpose of the work he had been called to do, he did, from time to time, need reassurance that his mother understood. In the most tender of moments, I would sense him searching for my absolution, needing to know I was not shocked or disheartened by the real work of his calling. At times, he would describe carefully chosen bits and pieces of a mission while never losing eye contact with me. I knew he was probably anticipating an adverse reaction on my part, but there was none, ever. I always made sure that in my eyes, Aaron only saw confidence and undaunted support. When Aaron and Billy entered deeper, more difficult conversations, I would often leave the room, not for my peace of mind, but for Aaron's. There were things I didn't need to know, things I didn't want him to have to share in my presence. War is ugly. It's real. It's not a motion picture or video game, and it's certainly not for the faint of heart. Real people die gruesome, horrible deaths. And in battle, you either kill or you are killed. Billy and I always made sure Aaron knew we would never question a decision he made in battle, and that his righteous heart could always be trusted. He'll never know how deeply I respected him for the hard life he chose. Chapter 15. Life as a SEAL. God reached out to me many times while Aaron was deployed, giving me comfort through dreams or words spoken that only he and I understood the significance of. On one particular occasion, I dreamed in the most vivid, lifelike setting imaginable that I was in our old farmhouse back in Tennessee. Walking into the utility room in the back of our home, I glanced out the window and noticed something move in the darkness. The object ducked behind the huge oak tree we used to picnic under when Aaron was a child. The tree stood near an old shed on the edge of the lawn, just this side of the gate leading to the barnyard. Attempting to make out the figure, I moved to the back door, the upper half of which was solid glass. At that moment in my dream, Aaron came running toward the house, half stooped over, nervously glancing right and left. He was dressed in work fatigues. I quickly opened the door and waved him in. He grabbed me and jerked me to the floor, and we leaned our backs against the washer and dryer, with our heads now below the line of vision from the wall-to-wall windows in front of us. Fully aware in my dream that Aaron was currently deployed, I pleaded with him to tell me that he was okay. With a reassuring smile, he calmly explained he was being chased and just needed to hide out with me until he could catch his breath. I expressed how much I missed him and how worried I was. When I asked him what I could do to help, he said, "Mom, I just need you to pray for me. That's all." After spending about 10 minutes in the safety of our farmhouse, he told me it was time for him to head back out. I hugged him goodbye. He told me not to worry, and then disappeared into the darkness. I awoke suddenly and began praying for any form of protection I could think of for Aaron and his teammates. A few days later, Aaron called home, and during that conversation, he told me about an incident which had happened a few nights earlier. He and his teammates had just completed a successful raid on a Taliban stronghold. Of course, he wasn't able to elaborate, but I assumed they had snuck in and captured a high-value target. While fleeing the raid and heading back to base, they suddenly noticed vehicles fall in behind them in heated pursuit. Aaron was driving the Humvee. He flipped the headlights off and began searching through night vision goggles for a place to pull off, take up position, and engage. The night was pitch black with almost zero visibility. With the engine wide open and dust clouds encircling the vehicle, Aaron suddenly felt the Humvee careening through the air, no traction beneath it. He had driven off the side of a bridge. Aaron's body was thrust forward as the Humvee made contact with earth, flipping, then rolling down a steep embankment. He braced himself with planted feet, pressing his back hard against his seat, his chest and head tossing from side to side. His driver's side door shook loose of its latch and flung open. He somehow grabbed the door and pulled it to his side just before the vehicle flipped one more time, the hard ground now inches away. Then finally an abrupt halt. Aaron explained that being able to pull that door shut saved his life. He would have been ejected and most likely crushed beneath the weight of the vehicle had he not mustered the ability to grab that handle. Everyone walked away uninjured. Like my dear friend Sarah carefully explained to me years earlier, God was always there, even when I couldn't be. Aaron was a man who constantly defied the odds. He encountered many situations that should have cost him his life but didn't. His life was saturated with stories of escape or safety, both coming only from the hand of God. One night in the desert of California, Aaron and his teammates participated in a training mission. They were practicing fast roping from a hovering chopper while fully outfitted for battle. The SEAL gear adds at least 60 pounds to their already bulky frames. Crosswinds and chopper blades stirred up the sand below and made an already black night even darker. Aaron was third or fourth in line, and when his turn came, he grabbed the rope to begin his 100-foot descent. No sooner had his feet left the chopper when he suddenly felt himself thrust upward, then jerked free of the rope. A gust of wind had hit the chopper and momentarily tossed it about. Aaron started free-falling toward the ground, slapping and snatching at the air, trying to make contact with a rope he could no longer see. His buddies below began scrambling, trying to get themselves underneath him in hopes of breaking his fall. Finally, Aaron felt that coarse thread of hope smack the palm of his hand. He grabbed on for dear life. While the rope slowed his descent, he never regained complete control. He crashed to the ground at a rapid rate of speed. Not knowing exactly what was going on, he felt himself flipping head over heel for what seemed like an eternity. He had landed on the edge of a steep hill, and momentum didn't allow any interruption of his fall. His teammates rushed over, fully expecting to find him dead or seriously injured at the bottom of the hill. Instead, they were met by white teeth and huge eyes climbing back up, completely uninjured. I can only imagine what left his mouth as he made his way toward his buddies. Holy crap, did you see that? That was awesome. Because of incidents like the Humvee and the fast roping, I had a unique confidence that not a hair on Aaron's head would be harmed without God's consent. In that confidence, I found tremendous peace. Aaron never took God's hedge of protection for granted either. In fact, he knew and understood the need for it more than most. If I had to choose one phrase to describe Aaron's strongest character trait, it would be this: he was never afraid to recognize or call out evil. Because our son gave his life to Christ at a very young age, he had a keen understanding of right and wrong, good and bad. Early on, we recognized that his most prominent spiritual gift was discernment. He used that gift well, and he used it boldly. He could see straight through any situation to the core of its merit or lack thereof. But more importantly, he had the fortitude to address it either way. Aaron never rode the fence on an issue. He always knew exactly where he stood and was prepared to defend his position if necessary. It's not that he wouldn't listen to your side, but if you were wrong, he would call you on it. If you were right, he would side with you. His values were strong enough to withstand criticism because he was grounded in truth, and in his mind, truth was irrevocable, period. I believe that due to the nature of Aaron's character, he came under an extensive amount of spiritual warfare. In his youth, he was plagued by a recurring nightmare of a dark figure dressed like the Queen of Spades, blocking his bedroom door, closing in on him until he woke in terror. We were stunned when in 2003 the military developed a set of playing cards to help troops identify the most wanted figures in Saddam Hussein's government. We all discussed how amazing it would be if one day Aaron killed the Queen of Spades or even ended up in a serious conflict with this character. To my knowledge, that encounter never took place. Throughout Aaron's childhood, I had my own recurring nightmare as well. In my dream, I would walk into a church to find everyone staring at me, waiting for some type of reaction. Seeing a casket at the altar, I would walk forward, looking from side to side in an attempt to figure out my surroundings and the reason I was there in the first place. When I would finally reach the coffin, I would fall to my knees wailing at the sight. It was Aaron. As people would rush toward me, I would wake up, sobbing out loud. This dream tortured me off and on for at least 10 years. In retrospect, I believe God was showing me I would have the task of burying my own son, and our lives and deaths would not follow the natural order. I also believe that in God's mercy, He used the nightmare to give me a unique sense of tenderness toward Aaron, which in turn led to a life of few regrets. In April 2010, Aaron started 6 months of the most rigorous evaluation in our nation's military, an all-consuming effort which, as expected, left almost no family time. After earning his highly esteemed position at the tip of the spear in October 2010, Aaron told his father and me that the training required to enter the elite SEAL Team 6 made BUD/S look like a cakewalk. I didn't understand until the process was over just how demanding it was or how much Aaron had privately overcome to succeed. To put this training in perspective, you need to understand that a SEAL has to have successfully completed at least 2 combat deployments before being considered for SEAL Team 6. The SEAL also must be noted and recommended as one of the best operators on his current team. Amazingly, out of that pool of those 1 in a million candidates, only half actually succeed and complete the training for SEAL Team 6. Aaron miraculously sailed through the evaluations, even though, unbeknownst to his trainers, he had lost a great deal of the vision in his right eye. He had developed a form of macular degeneration and should have had experimental surgery months earlier, but he didn't want to put a cog in the wheel of his tremendous progress. The vision issues forced him to shoot from the opposite side of his body and also caused a near total lack of peripheral vision, which created much greater challenges when clearing a room. My full understanding of just how amazing it was that Aaron had been able to compensate for his loss of eyesight didn't come until after Aaron had passed away, and I read the book Fearless, The Undaunted Courage and Ultimate Sacrifice of Navy SEAL Team 6 operator Adam Brown. In that book, I read about the unimaginable spirit of a man who overcame the loss of sight in his right eye, forcing him to retrain using his left eye. Never before had it dawned on me just how monumental of a task that was. Aaron had accomplished so much more than I had been aware of. Adam Brown, a name etched in my soul. Adam lost his life on March 17, 2010, in the Hindu Kush Mountains of Afghanistan during a heated battle. Adam's death sent a shockwave through the Team 6 community and personally affected my son's heart in a way that I'll never adequately convey. While Aaron had certainly seen his share of deaths through the years, something about Adam's death pierced him and caused him to take the loss personally. I'm sure, at least in part, this feeling was intensified because of the deep faith in Christ that marked Adam's character and life, something Aaron absolutely identified with. Adam was not only a brother in arms, but also a brother in Christ. After Adam's death, a short film was made and published online in his honor. Aaron requested that I watch the film, and he refused to rest until I did. I started it several times, but had to turn it off. The story was so well done that Adam's personality leaped off the screen straight into my heart. It was too much, too painful, too real. My heart ached with each attempt, but Aaron kept insisting. Day after day, he would call and ask, "Have you watched it yet?" I explained to him how difficult it was for me to sit through the film, knowing that one day it could be my son, my loss. Aaron never let up. "You need to watch all of it, Mom. You need to know this man and his sacrifice." On the next phone call, he asked again, "Have you watched it?" "Mom, every American needs to watch this. They need to know that men like Adam Brown lived and died for them." I finally watched the entire film and then encouraged others to do the same, but that film wrecked me. Little did I know that less than a year later, Aaron would be working with not only the same SEAL team Adam was fighting with when he lost his life, but also the same exact squad and troop. Chapter 16. God is good. God is good. He knows what lies ahead and often pours His love out in advance, knowing what we'll need to make it through what's waiting down the road. During the 10 months before Aaron's death, we spent more time together as a family than in any other year since he had joined the military. In addition, he had been able to visit all his loved ones back in Northwest Tennessee on multiple occasions, something which had never happened before. He created a social media page and spent that year reconnecting with many friends from his youth, including Caleb Chandler, the one he had lit that bottle rocket with all those years before. Aaron took a weekend trip to Nashville, where he spent time with another one of his high school buddies, Will David Coleman. I guess they had a pretty good time, because during the next conversation I had with Aaron, he told me he wanted to move to Nashville when he left the teams. He had visited the Music City many times in his youth, with his father and me, but I guess visiting as an adult was an entirely different experience. He had seen the world by now, but insisted Nashville was by far the coolest place he had ever been. In late October 2010, I turned the corner leading to my house and was shocked to see Aaron's truck in our driveway. He, Kimberly, and Reagan were already inside, waiting for Billy and me to arrive home. Since Billy's and my 30th wedding anniversary was only a few days away, I assumed our kids had planned something special. I didn't care what that special something was. It was just an incredible blessing to have all of them home and the whole family together. Later that evening, my mom showed up all the way from Tennessee. After the hugs and excitement died down, I looked at the kids and asked what was going on. Tara spoke. "Well, we all got together and bought you guys a photo shoot on the beach for your anniversary. We knew how much it would mean to you if the whole family could be in the pictures." I was stunned and so incredibly happy. I remember thinking to myself that night as I dropped into bed beside Billy, completely exhausted from all the laughter we had shared throughout the evening. We really do have it all, don't we? I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. We spent the next day enjoying one another's company and making memories. Tara and her husband Adam's oldest daughter, Annabelle, adored Aaron. She always had. She clung to him like white on rice, hanging on his every move. The deep affection and attention were absolutely reciprocated. On the contrary, their youngest, Lila, was terrified of Aaron. Her reaction always gave us a good chuckle. All Aaron had to do was look at her, and she would well up with tears and reach for her mother. Naturally, Aaron thought it was hilarious to scare little Lila. He would sneak up behind her high chair, place his face right beside hers, and wait for her to notice him. As soon as she saw him, she would lunge her body to the other side of the chair, and of course, Aaron was on that side waiting for her. The result brought the whole table to a roar. Our family has always had a lot of fun scaring each other, so Aaron got that trait honestly. Oh, the stories I could tell. Aaron gave little 1-year-old Reagan a pretty good scare as well that day. Reagan was laying on his belly fussing. Aaron threw on a werewolf mask, crawled up behind him and flipped him over. The poor little guy nearly came off the floor in a startled jolt, letting out an ear-piercing shriek. Aaron pulled the mask off, snatched Reagan up, and literally writhed with laughter. Seeing that I caught the whole thing on video, Aaron flipped around and wheezed out, "Don't put that on Facebook." I made no promises. Later that afternoon, when we arrived at the beach for our photo shoot, we were met by not only Billy's parents, who had also come in from Tennessee, but our pastor and a whole host of our closest friends. Unbeknownst to us, our kids had spent months planning the photo shoot, plus a sunset vow renewal on our favorite beach, the House of Refuge. The ceremony was breathtaking. With my husband, the love of my youth, before me, the Atlantic Ocean to my left, and our loved ones to the right, we recited once again the promises we had made 30 years earlier, the promises we had never broken. I never felt more loved or thankful. The evening wasn't over. Tara, Anna, and Aaron had created a full-fledged wedding reception at the home of our friends, Hoss and Linda Wiggins. We arrived to soft music flowing over beautifully appointed tables, flowers and candles in the center of each, an over-the-top spread of delicious hors d'oeuvres and a lavish buffet. They had even set up a head table adorned with china and stemware so Billy and I could face our guests. The entire night was magical. As her gift to us, Tara had made a photo book that included snapshots and letters from everyone in our family. When we turned to my father's page, there was a letter from him, written by Tara. We were amazed at how much her words sounded like my dad's. He had been gone from us for 9 years at that point. Our hearts ached as together we all longed for his presence. I couldn't stop crying enough to finish reading the letter, so Tara took the book and shared the final words. By the end, we were all in tears at the many memories that flooded our minds, and we could barely bring ourselves to continue. When we finally turned the page, we found Aaron's note, all 3 sentences of it. After reading the only 3 sentences on the page, Billy chuckled and said, "Wow, son, you really outdid yourself, huh?" Aaron blurted out with complete exasperation, "Okay, that's not fair. Tara didn't tell me she was going to be channeling our dead grandfather. How come I have to go right after Daddy Frank? How am I supposed to compete with that?" The entire room erupted with laughter. Our sweet friend and photographer, Casey Brush, flawlessly captured every emotion of that incredible evening. She later gifted Billy and me with a framed photo of our entire family captioned, "All because 2 people fell in love." Next came Christmas. Aaron and Kimberly decided to spend almost 2 weeks with us in Florida for the holidays. Man, did we ever have fun. Billy and I had purchased BB guns for each of the grandchildren, knowing full well none of them were really old enough to use the guns. But we thought it would be fun anyway. We bought pink for the girls and the classic Red Ryder for Reagan. As soon as all the gifts were opened on Christmas morning, Aaron grabbed Reagan's gun, shrugged a shoulder toward Adam while opening the back door and said, "Hey, Adam, grab one of those pink ones over there. Let's go." Again, laughter. During that visit, Billy and Aaron tried nearly every day to take the boat out for some deep sea fishing. However, in the winter, the ocean is rough. They woke up on the very last morning of vacation and knew it was a now or never thing. Billy's friend Sal came over to help get the boat ready. Both Aaron and Billy wanted to take Reagan along on the trip, but after some deliberation and knowing it was going to be a long, rough day, they finally looked at each other and agreed to take him next time. Oh, the plans we make, thinking life will always follow the paths created by our own minds. Chapter 17. I'll See You in November. On June 3rd, 2011, Aaron and Kimberly welcomed their second child into the world, Catherine Chamberlain Vaughn. When Aaron called moments after the birth to tell me it was a little girl, I began praying that he would consider winding down his dangerous career. Since men are generally much more protective by nature over their daughters than their sons, I was hopeful. After Chamberlain's birth, Aaron and Kimberly relocated to Kimberly's parents' home in Northern Virginia, since Aaron's upcoming deployment would leave her with no help otherwise. Reagan was 21 months old at the time. 2 weeks later, Tara and I, along with her 2 little girls, jumped in the car, buckled up, and made the long haul from Florida to Washington, D.C. Anna stayed behind, unable to get time off from her job. Billy, who had been out of state for work, met us there on our second day. Together as a family, we celebrated the birth of our newest addition and had an early celebration of Aaron's 30th birthday, which was only days away. Watching my son hold his baby girl was an incredible experience. He kept saying over and over again, "Isn't she so beautiful? I've never seen anything so beautiful." He was mesmerized. The typical Vaughn family fun that occurs whenever we are all together was a little difficult to embrace because Aaron's deployment to Afghanistan was rapidly approaching. Even though it was hard and our time together that weekend was short, our days were filled with incredible memories. In any other situation, those memories probably wouldn't seem significant, but in light of what lay ahead for us, their significance is now immeasurable. Our family, in large part, is very musically inclined. At the time, Tara and I were both singing for private events and leading worship in our local church. Aaron had been learning to play the guitar and had brought it home with him on his last few visits. And although I had known since his childhood that Aaron was also gifted vocally, I had no idea how good he had actually become until he called me downstairs on the first morning of our visit. Timidly, he asked me to listen to a rough recording he had made on his iPhone of just him singing and playing his guitar. I listened in stunned silence to the Aaron Vaughn versions of The Ride by Hank Williams Jr. and Simple Man by Lynyrd Skynyrd. Aaron's voice blew me away. As soon as the second song ended, I called Tara down to listen as well. She was equally moved by a level of talent that we previously had no idea existed. Knowing that Aaron already loved Nashville, Tara suggested he go ahead and move there when he retired from the teams so he could try his hand as a country music artist. We sat downstairs in Kimberly's parents' basement for hours, Aaron playing the guitar, and all three of us singing together while Reagan crawled up and down the basement steps, giggling and smiling. Since our playlists weren't the same, we struggled to find songs we all knew. But we had trouble pulling up chord tabs because of a weak internet connection. We ended up just muddling through as best we could, enjoying each other's company and our newfound commonality. Nearing the end of that unforgettable time in the basement, Tara asked Aaron if he knew a certain song. Aaron said, "Oh yeah, I love that song, but I don't know the chords." They attempted to struggle through it, but finally gave up and made a pact that before the next time they got together, they would both learn "If I Die Young" by the band Perry. Then we all left the basement and headed to a nearby restaurant for lunch. After an hour or so at the restaurant, Chamberlain started fussing and wanting to be fed and put down for a nap. I offered to take Kimberly and all the kids home while Aaron and Tara finished their lunch and conversation. This was a God-ordained moment in time, meant just for my daughter and my son, their last alone time on this side of eternity. As the two of them sat together by themselves for the first time in many years, they rehearsed childhood stories, laughed together, spoke of their current lives and future dreams, and remembered just how much they missed that kind of togetherness. Tara took the time to tell Aaron how proud she was of him, how much she honored and appreciated all he had become, and how deeply she loved him. Money cannot buy moments like that. Little did she know these would be some of her last words to the hero and best friend of her childhood. After the next day, she would never see his face again. That next day went by in a blur. Breakfast at IHOP, the next, which is the Navy Exchange, for supplies, lunch and ice cream, loads of snuggle time with the grandbabies, and then dinner somewhere. I don't recall where. What I do recall is what happened next. We all returned to the hotel where Billy, Tara, and I were staying. We wanted to spend just a little more time together before our departure early the following morning. My memory captured every detail of that room: the corner chair where Kimberly held the baby, the window overlooking all of our vehicles, and the 2 queen-sized beds Billy and I shared with Tara and our granddaughters. About an hour after arriving at the hotel, Kimberly decided to take Reagan and Chamberlain home. It had been a long day for all of them, and sadly, nighttime had come. Not long after Kimberly left, everyone fell asleep, except for Aaron and me. The time had once again come for one of our incredibly special, consecrated through decades of repetition, late-night talks. Like always, it started around 10 and ended around 3 the next morning. While these talks were typically sprinkled with jokes and laughter, none of that occurred that night. Our conversation was serious and made up of questions like, "You'll be a lot safer on this deployment than any of the others you've been on, right, son? Since you'll be with SEAL Team 6, right?" And Aaron's answer, "Actually, this will be the most dangerous deployment I've ever been on, Mom. We're going to be working in a really bad area." Something in my head refused to hear Aaron's response. I kept making light of the serious nature of his comments. I swept to the back of my mind every warning he gave me that something would be very different about this deployment. Maybe it was because there was absolutely no fear in his voice, but instead, he was resolute and anxious to deploy. It's odd that my brain didn't process what was happening, because never in the past had Aaron and I had a conversation where such statements were made. "Mom, this team has done missions where everyone was advised to write letters to their loved ones, just in case. Suicide missions, where they felt like there'd be a good chance they'd never come home. And somehow still, I missed it." I was laser focused on November and the huge family reunion we were planning back in Tennessee, the home of Aaron's youth and the home of nearly all of our living relatives. And this was a short deployment, 4 little months. It would be over before we knew it, and we would all be together at Granny's and Papa's house, Billy's parents, nestled on the warm, familiar farm where our family began. It was going to be awesome, with lots of laughter and lots of little kids from our newest generation running wildly through the house. We would most definitely blow something up, since explosives of some sort always went off when all the Vaughn boys got together. We would take family pictures and have barbecues. We would shoot at targets in the ravine off the back porch, and Granny's deck would be covered with shell casings, trapped in the crevices between the wood planks, making them impossible to sweep up. Aaron and the rest of the men would go hunting, a Vaughn holiday tradition he had been part of since childhood. We would all gather around Uncle Jerry's, Adam's, Larry's, and Aaron's guitars and sing until our throats were raw. My mom would come over from Knoxville and spend at least a few of those days with us. Aaron would box in the backyard with his younger cousins, Trey and Ethan. Some of his teammates from West Memphis or friends from Nashville might even come up and spend a day. I had plans, big plans. That's all I could focus on that night. Maybe it was a matter of self-preservation, or maybe just complete naivete that anything bad could happen to my son. It had always been someone else's son before. Whatever the case, it never crossed my mind that this would be our last night together. Finally, the dreaded words spilled out of Aaron's mouth. "Well, I'd better go so you can get some sleep, Mom. You've got a long drive ahead of you tomorrow." Our visit was over. Aaron woke his sister and her daughters to hug them goodbye. Though they exchanged "I love yous," their eyes never really opened. Billy woke up and composed himself, and the three of us walked downstairs. Just the three of us. As it was in the beginning, it was in our final moments. Me, Billy, and our boy. The glass hotel doors slid apart, and the warm summer breeze, moist with morning dew, blew quietly across our skin. With nothing left to say but goodbye, I hugged my son for the final time, while Billy stood by, waiting to walk Aaron to his truck. I expected the same hug I had been receiving for years. Since Aaron was 6'4", our hugs were awkward. I would lay my head on the side of his chest and wrap my arms around his waist, while he would wrap one arm around me and pat my back with the other hand. But this time was different. Aaron grabbed me with both arms, pulled me close, laid his cheek on top of my head, and squeezed me like he hadn't done since childhood. He held on to me for an unusually long time, so long that I actually tried to pull away after a few seconds, but Aaron tightened his grip. I just stood there holding on to him until he decided to let go, and that shook me. Backing away, but now gripping both of his arms in my hands, I looked up and asked, "Is everything okay, son?" "It's fine, Mom. Just go on inside. I'll call you tomorrow." "Are you sure, Aaron?" "I'm sure, Mom." A sweet but hesitant smile slowly spread on his beautiful face. As I released my grip and stepped back toward the door, I glanced at Billy, wondering if he noticed what had just taken place. He hadn't. He was looking down, scuffing the concrete sidewalk with the ball of his shoe, and dreading his final goodbye. "Go on in, Mom. You need sleep." Both hands now in his jean pockets, Aaron gestured toward the door with his head and right shoulder. As I turned to walk inside after we exchanged our final "I love you," I could sense that Aaron hadn't moved. Just as I entered the sliding glass doors, I glanced over my shoulder and saw that, sure enough, he hadn't budged. Aaron just stood there staring at me. In retrospect, it was as if he knew in his heart this would be the last time he would ever see his mom. Puzzled, I spun around, demanding again, "Son, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. You need to go on in and get some sleep." Billy looked up and gave me a nod in the direction of the door. Worry flooded my heart, and for the first time that night, I felt fear. But being a pro at choking down those fears through years of watching my boy leave on deployment after deployment, I regained my composure. "I'll see you in November, son. I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you." Aaron said back, "I love you too, Mom." As I entered the lobby, I turned one last time. Aaron and his dad were finally making their way to the truck, and that was it. My last vision of my boy here on earth, walking side by side with his dad. We briefly spoke the following day during my drive back to South Florida, and then again for the final time a few days later, as Aaron was boarding the plane. He always called just before taking off for an overseas deployment. After a hurried rehearsal of our plans for Thanksgiving and a quick exchange of our final goodbyes, I spoke words that had been shared between us many times in the past. I said, "You bring yourself home to me, you hear?" But instead of the usual, "I will, Mom," his response stopped me in my tracks. With all the tenderness and humility one could muster, he said, "I hate it when people say that to me." Taken aback, I fumbled for a recovery while doing my best to keep the conversation light, so I said, "Then go kick some butt." With a chuckle in his voice, he said, "That's better. I can do that." And once again, I carelessly threw aside any notion that those words could have been some type of forewarning. They never crossed my mind again until August 6th.